A Bite of Holiday Magic. A magical paranormal holiday rom-com with enchanted baking and unexpected love. By Win Valentine. Copyright 2024 by Win Valentine. All rights reserved. No part of this publication may be reproduced, stored, or transmitted in any form by any means, electronic, mechanical, photocopying, recording, scanning, or otherwise without written permission from the publisher. It is illegal to copy this book, post it to a website, or distribute it by any other means without permission. This novel is entirely a work of fiction. The names, characters, and incidents portrayed in it are the work of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, events or localities is entirely coincidental. Win Valentine asserts the moral right to be identified as the author of this work. Designations used by companies to distinguish their products are often claimed as trademarks. All brand names and product names used in this book and on its cover are trade names, service marks, trademarks, and registered trademarks of their respective owners. The publishers and the book are not associated with any product or vendor mentioned in this book. None of the companies referenced within the book have endorsed the book. Book cover by Dana Sacco. Chapter 1: Sugar, Spice, and Shattered Dreams. Lumi Vale's fingers hovered steady as starlight as she guided the enchanted frosting across her masterpiece. The pearlescent icing flowed from the piping bag like liquid moonbeams, forming delicate snowflake patterns that caught the warm glow from the candy cane chandelier above. Each crystalline whorl sparkled with just the right amount of winter magic, enough to delight the judges, but not so much that it overshadowed the cake's technical perfection. "Just a little more to the left," she murmured, tilting her head as she adjusted the final flourish. Behind her, Blaze, her enchanted oven, hummed a content little melody that made the copper pots hanging on the wall dance ever so slightly. Her apron, currently a focused shade of deep blue, shifted to determined crimson as she began placing the magical peppermint swirls. The translucent candies bobbed and weaved through the air just above the cake's surface, creating a mesmerizing dance of red and white. "Oh sure, spend another hour adjusting those peppermints. It's not like they're already perfectly aligned or anything," Flicker, her enchanted oven mitt, drawled from its hook by the stove. "I mean, what's wrong with the first 17 positions you tried?" Lumi shot the mitt a look that could have melted butter. "There's nothing wrong with wanting everything to be perfect." She nudged one stubborn peppermint a millimeter to the right. "Especially after last year's incident." Her fingers brushed against the scorched spot on the counter, a permanent reminder of her previous attempt at the Wintertide Bake-Off. The burn mark looked suspiciously like a startled reindeer, though she refused to acknowledge that particular detail. From their snow globe prison on the shelf, her collection of enchanted gingerbread soldiers pressed their cookie faces against the glass, watching her every move with their gumdrop eyes. She'd caught them trying to stage another rebellion last week, but now they seemed content to serve as an oddly attentive audience. With precise movements, she reached for the special container of enchanted cocoa. The powder drifted down like evening snow, transforming the cake's surface into something that rivaled the winter sky. Each layer beneath held its own seasonal charm: peppermint dreams in the bottom tier, frosted wishes in the middle, and crystallized starlight in the top. Her ember orange eyes glowed with satisfaction as she stepped back to examine her work. 3 perfect tiers of winter wonder, each one a testament to hours of precise spellwork and careful baking. Even Blaze had cooperated today, maintaining the exact temperature needed for the delicate magical infusions. The display case's preservation charm hummed eagerly, ready to keep her masterpiece in pristine condition until tomorrow's competition. All she had to do was transport it safely across the kitchen. Simple enough. She took a deep breath, feeling her ash-like freckles warm with concentration as she slipped her hands beneath the cake stand. A few strands of fiery red hair escaped her messy bun, but she didn't dare adjust them now. The familiar scents of her bakery, warm cinnamon, sweet caramel, and today's fresh peppermint, wrapped around her like a comfortable blanket. "Steady now," she whispered to herself, lifting the cake with the careful precision of a bomb disposal expert. Just a few steps to the display case and crash. The thunderous sound from the front of the bakery made her jump. Her heart leapt into her throat as the tinkling of the front door's bells mixed with the distinct sound of breaking glass. And was that jingling sleigh bells? Oh, sugar and spice, she breathed, fingers tightening on the cake stand as chaos erupted in her perfectly ordered bakery. Dax Blitzen burst through the door of Sweet Inferno, his heart racing as he fled from the enchanted mistletoe that had been chasing him down Main Street. Snow dusted his sandy blonde hair, melting quickly in the bakery's cozy warmth. He felt the familiar tingle of his antlers flickering in and out of existence, a sure sign his magic was acting up again. Safe at la, the words died in his throat as his boots hit the polished floor. He windmilled his arms, desperately trying to maintain balance, but his momentum carried him forward like a wayward sled. His flannel shirt caught on a towering display of candy canes, and time seemed to slow as horror dawned across his features. No, 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 he muttered, watching the display wobble. The candy canes launched into the air like festive javelins, and because the universe clearly had it out for him today, his chaotic magic chose that exact moment to misfire. A spark of golden light shot from his fingers, hitting the nearest candy cane. Deck the halls with boughs of holly. The candy cane burst into song, its stripes glowing as it pirouetted through the air. Its companions joined the chorus, spinning in elaborate loops and leaving trails of peppermint sparkles in their wake. Efe la 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 la, la 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 la. Dax stumbled backward, trying to dodge the impromptu aerial performance. His shoulder bumped into someone, and he spun around to find himself face to face with the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. Her ember-orange eyes widened in shock as she clutched an elaborate cake, its frosting swirling with magical patterns. I'm so sorry, his apology cut short as the cake left her hands, launching into a graceful arc through the air. Dax lunged forward, his magic surging in panic. The floating peppermints around them exploded like tiny fireworks, showering everything in minty confetti. His fingers brushed the cake's edge, but it was too late. The masterpiece hit the floor with a spectacular splat, its magical elements misfiring in all directions. Mini snowstorms erupted across the tile, while tiny northern lights danced over the ruined frosting. A group of sugar snowflakes spun into existence, only to melt instantly in the heat of, oh no. The baker's fiery red hair had literally ignited, flames licking at the strands as her ember-orange eyes blazed with fury. From a nearby counter, a red oven mitt began waving frantically at him, its fabric creasing in what looked suspiciously like panic. Dax ran a nervous hand through his tousled hair, summoning every ounce of charm he possessed. I don't suppose you'd believe I was testing your cake's flying capabilities? He flashed his most winning smile, the one that usually got him out of trouble with his grandmother. The temperature in the bakery rose several degrees. Small flames danced around the woman's clenched fists, and Dax noticed a snow globe on the counter where tiny gingerbread men were shaking their fists at him in solidarity with their owner. Look, I can explain everything, Dax said, backing away slowly with his hands raised. The mistletoe was very persistent, and a wave of demonic fire rolled across the floor toward him. His fight-or-flight response kicked in, magic surging through him uncontrollably. His antlers fully manifested with a pop, catching on yet another display, this one featuring delicate sugar sculptures. The crash that followed was impressive, even by his standards. Spun sugar snowflakes shattered across the floor, mixing with the peppermint confetti and still-singing candy canes to create what had to be the most festive disaster in Snowmelt Hollow's history. Jingle bells, warbled a particularly enthusiastic candy cane as it bounced off his antlers. The baker, who he now recognized as Lumi Vale, owner of Sweet Inferno, took a step forward, flames trailing in her wake. That, she said, her voice deadly calm, was my Wintertide Bake-Off entry. Dax's stomach dropped faster than the cake had. Of all the bakeries in all of Snowmelt Hollow, he had to crash into this one. Into this baker. Into this cake. The same cake he'd been hoping would win the competition he was supposed to be organizing. The enchanted oven mitt had graduated from frantic waving to what appeared to be mime-style pleading. A candy cane swooped past, now performing an operatic version of Silent Night. "I can fix this," Dax said, though he wasn't entirely sure how. His magic sparked between his antlers, causing the nearest sugar sculpture remains to reassemble themselves into a tiny, lopsided reindeer. "Or, maybe I can buy you dinner instead." The flames around Lumi's hands flared higher. Wrong thing to say. Definitely the wrong thing to say. "I mean, I can help you remake it. I'm actually pretty good at." Another wave of demonic fire rolled toward him, and this time his partial shift couldn't be stopped. His nose twitched, taking on a distinctly reindeer-like quality as he hopped backward to avoid the flames. The baking? The last sugar sculpture crashed to the floor, providing a crystalline percussion section for the candy cane choir, which had now launched into a jazz rendition of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Dax had never felt more called out by holiday music in his life. Lumi took several deep breaths, each exhale releasing wisps of smoke as she wrestled her temper under control. The demonic flames surrounding her gradually died down, leaving perfect circular scorch marks on her previously pristine floor. Great. Another mess to clean up. "Look, I'm really sorry about the cake." Dax ran a hand through his hair, that irritating silver sheen still glinting like fresh snow in sunlight. The remnants of his shifter form clung to him, making him look far too ethereal for someone who just destroyed hours of work. "Get out." Her voice crackled like kindling, sharp and ready to ignite. "If you'll just let me explain." He took a step forward, promptly tangling his feet in the fallen candy cane display. The enchanted treats burst into song, a cacophonous rendition of Silent Night that was anything but silent. Some sang soprano, others went for bass, and one particularly enthusiastic candy cane seemed determined to rap. Flicker, her trusty oven mitt, flew from its hook and made aggressive shooing motions at Dax. Lumi pointed to the door, her arm trembling with the effort of containing her power. "Out. Now." The air between them crackled with conflicting magic, her fiery demon heritage clashing with whatever chaos he carried. Sparks danced through the bakery like demented fireflies, causing the candy cane chandelier overhead to flicker wildly. The magical lights pulsed from blinding bright to dim and back again, casting strange shadows across Dax's apologetic face. He finally seemed to get the message, backing toward the door with all the grace of a newborn reindeer. The bell above jingled mournfully as he left, the sound somehow managing to convey exactly how Lumi felt about this entire disaster. She surveyed her kingdom of chaos. Her beautiful peppermint mocha cake lay in ruins, looking more like abstract art than the elegant creation it had been. Candy canes littered the floor, still humming their discordant tune. Every surface sparkled with a fine dusting of magical residue, the result of their powers colliding. It looked like a unicorn had sneezed glitter all over her bakery. "This is fine," she muttered, sinking onto a nearby stool. "Everything is completely fine." Her hair, which had been actively flames moments ago, settled back into its natural red waves, a few strands still smoking slightly. Blaze made a concerned whirring sound from his corner of the kitchen, his temperature gauge fluctuating sympathetically. I know. Lumi buried her face in her hands, then immediately regretted it when she felt magical residue stick to her skin. "The cake is ruined, and I used the last of my special enchanted peppermint extract. The extract that took 2 weeks to properly infuse with moonlight." She groaned. "The extract that's impossible to remake before the bake-off." She grabbed a broom and dustpan, attacking the sparkly mess with perhaps more vigor than necessary. Stupid reindeer shifter with his stupid perfect hair and his stupid clumsy feet. The broom bristles squeaked against the floor as she swept. Who even puts him in charge of the bake-off? That's like putting a fox in charge of chicken coop security. Flicker patted her shoulder consolingly, leaving a small glowing handprint on her sleeve. "Thanks, but sympathy isn't going to fix this." She dumped another pan of magical residue into the trash, watching it shimmer as it fell. "I mean, who just crashes into a display like that? Was he raised in a barn?" She paused, considering. Actually, maybe he was. Do reindeer shifters live in barns? No focus, Lumi. The clock chose that moment to chime, its magical face showing not just the time but also a countdown to the bake-off. 3 days, 14 hours, and 27 minutes. Each chime felt like another nail in her competitive coffin. Lumi slumped against the counter, letting her forehead rest on the cool surface. I'm doomed. Completely and utterly doomed. The counter offered no argument to this assessment. Blaze clicked and whirred, his temperature dial spinning in what she recognized as his attempt at encouragement. A warm draft wafted over her, smelling of vanilla and comfort. Thanks, but unless you can magically produce more enchanted peppermint extract, I don't see how. The bell above the door jingled again, and Lumi's head snapped up. Or CL. But it was just the wind rattling the door. With a heavy sigh, she trudged over to flip the sign from open to closed, catching her reflection in the window. She looked exactly how she felt, defeated, covered in sparkles, and sporting what appeared to be candy cane stripes in her hair from the magical backlash. A lone candy cane, apparently not ready to give up its musical career, launched into the final verse of Silent Night. Lumi reached down, snatched it up, and dropped it into the jar labeled the timeout corner, where she kept all the particularly mischievous enchanted treats. This is not how I plan to spend my evening. She surveyed the still messy bakery, the ruined cake, and the persistent magical sparkles that seemed to be multiplying rather than diminishing. I don't suppose any of you know where I can find industrial-strength magic cleaner at this hour? Blaze's timer dinged in response, which wasn't helpful at all. The enchanted peppermint extract had been the cornerstone of her winning strategy. Without it, she'd have to completely reimagine her entry. 3 days wasn't nearly enough time to perfect a new recipe, especially not one worthy of the Golden Whisk trophy. But as she stared at the mess around her, one thought kept circling through her mind: she was absolutely going to find a way to make Dax Blitzen pay for this. Chapter 2: A Proposal with Sprinkles. Lumi attacked the cookie dough like it had personally offended her, which, given the day's events, felt entirely justified. Recipe books lay scattered across every available surface of Sweet Inferno's kitchen, their pages ruffled by her increasingly frantic page-turning. Her enchanted apron couldn't seem to settle on a color, shifting between an angry crimson and a dejected gray that perfectly matched her mood. There has to be something here. She smacked another book closed, sending a puff of flour into the air. Some recipe that doesn't need, the words stuck in her throat. Even thinking about her lost peppermint extract made her want to set something on fire. Flicker swooped in with what she assumed was meant to be a comforting pat, glowing warmly against her arm. Unfortunately, the mitt's enthusiasm translated into a bit too much heat, and the recipe card it was trying to straighten burst into flames. Really? Lumi fixed Flicker with an exasperated glare as she extinguished the small fire. That was my grandmother's snickerdoodle recipe. The mitt drooped apologetically, its ember patterns dimming. With a heavy sigh, she turned to her ingredient shelves. The neat rows of magical components that usually brought her such joy now seemed to mock her with their inadequacy. Moon-kissed vanilla, star-dusted sugar, dawn-harvested berries, all wonderful ingredients, but nothing that could replace the complex notes of her enchanted peppermint. Her ember-orange eyes dimmed as she did the mental math. Even if I combined the essence of frost-bitten roses with ethereal honey, it wouldn't have the same kick. She picked up a jar of shimmer spice, then set it back down with perhaps more force than necessary. Blaze's temperature gauge began to spin, stopping at various temperatures as he offered suggestions. 325 degrees Fahrenheit, perfect for cloud-light macarons. 400 degrees Fahrenheit, ideal for phoenix feather pastries. 450 degrees Fahrenheit, guaranteed to make any dragon fruit tart sing. Literally. I appreciate the help, but, Lumi gestured at her depleted stores. I don't have enough phoenix feathers for the pastries, the cloud essence for macarons evaporated last week, and my last dragon fruit tried to eat the measuring cups. The bell above the door chimed, so hesitantly it almost seemed afraid. Lumi turned to see Dax Blitzen hovering in the doorway, 1 foot barely over the threshold as he scanned the room for any sign of demonic flames. Her hair immediately began to spark, tiny embers dancing at the ends. On the cooling rack, a batch of sugar cookies developed distinct scorch marks around the edges. Before you say anything, Dax held up his hands in surrender, then carefully extracted something from his messenger bag. The frost-crystallized sugar caught the light from her candy cane chandelier, sending rainbow refractions dancing across the walls. Lumi's breath caught. Frost-crystallized sugar was rare enough to make even the most seasoned baker weep. It could only be harvested during the winter solstice, when the first snowfall met the last autumn sunset. I know I messed up, Dax continued, taking a tentative step forward. His enthusiasm got the better of him as he gestured, accidentally sending a nearby whisk into an impromptu ballet across the counter. He snatched it mid-pirouette, offering a sheepish grin. But I want to help fix it. She crossed her arms, feeling her freckles darken with skepticism. Out of the corner of her eye, she caught Blaze and Flicker exchanging what they probably thought were subtle glances. Fix it? She arched an eyebrow. Like how you fixed Mrs. Winterberry's prize-winning ice sculpture last year? The one that ended up doing the mambo down Main Street? That was one time. Dax protested. And you have to admit, it had excellent rhythm. Lumi pinched the bridge of her nose. If, and this is a very big if, I let you help, there would have to be rules. She began ticking them off on her fingers. No transforming in the kitchen. Your chaos magic stays at least 3 feet from the oven at all times. No touching any ingredient without explicit permission. And absolutely no teaching my utensils to dance. Blaze rumbled in agreement, his temperature gauge nodding emphatically. I solemnly swear to behave. Dax placed one hand over his heart, though the mischievous twinkle in his eyes somewhat undermined his serious expression. A few snowflakes materialized above his head, quickly melting in the warm bakery air. Scout's honor. Were you even a scout? No, but I did once help a troop of brownies build the world's largest mushroom fort. Despite herself, Lumi felt the corner of her mouth twitch. She looked at the frost-crystallized sugar, then at her ruined kitchen, then back at Dax's hopeful face. Fine, she said finally, extending her hand. But one wrong move, and I'm turning you into reindeer toast. The moment their hands touched, static sparked between them, their competing magics creating tiny firework-like explosions in the air. The candy cane chandelier flickered erratically, and Blaze made a sound suspiciously like a snicker. Lumi quickly pulled her hand back, trying to ignore the lingering tingle in her fingers. Right. Well. First things first, you're helping me clean up this mess. She tossed him a broom, which immediately tried to sweep him instead of the floor. And would you please stop accidentally enchanting my cleaning supplies? Dax reached for one of Lumi's spare aprons hanging by the prep station, determined to prove he could be helpful despite his earlier disaster. Trust me, I've got this. Baking's in my blood. The moment he tied the strings, the apron's usually static pattern of dancing gingerbread men began cycling through colors like a hyperactive Christmas light display. Red to green to purple to plaid to polka dots, each pattern more garish than the last. That's not supposed to happen, is it? He tugged at the fabric, his chaotic magic making the pattern swirl faster. Lumi pressed her lips together, clearly fighting back a comment about his helping. Right, mixing bowls? He strode toward the gleaming copper bowls stacked on the counter. Did you know my great-great-grandmother actually invented the self-stirring cauldron? Revolutionary for magical baking, really changed the game for? The bowls shuddered as he approached, inching away like nervous animals. Hey, come back here. The bowls scooted faster, making a horrible scraping sound against the marble countertop. One particularly rebellious bowl spun in circles before zooming toward the edge. I've got it. Dax lunged forward, concentration furrowing his brow. A familiar tingling sensation crawled across his scalp, the telltale sign his magic was acting up. Before he could stop it, his antlers partially manifested, catching the overhead lights like silver branches. The mixing bowl escaped. Worse, his newly sprouted antlers caught the large container of flour perched on the upper shelf. Time seemed to slow as the container tipped, then upended completely. Poof. A white cloud exploded through the kitchen, coating everything in a fine, sparkly dust. Through the haze, Dax caught Lumi's expression, somewhere between murder and morbid fascination. So, he coughed, trying to wave away the flour fog, about that revolutionary cauldron. Just watch me first. Lumi grabbed a whisk, demonstrating a precise circular motion that made the air shimmer with controlled magic. Like this. Gentle but firm. Gentle but firm. Got it. Dax mimicked her grip on a second whisk. The moment his magic connected, the whisk jerked in his hand like it had been possessed by a sugar-rushed pixie. It spun wildly, creating a mini tornado of ingredients that threatened to escape the bowl. Behind them, Blaze let out a series of alarmed whistles as Dax's chaos magic rippled through the kitchen. The oven's flames flickered green, then blue, then shot up in shapes that looked suspiciously like laughing faces. I meant to do that, Dax said quickly. Adds character to the wait, no, come back. The mixing bowls had chosen that moment to stage a revolt, creating a cyclone of sugar and spice when he turned to check on Blaze. His eyes widened as the magical chaos intensified, a familiar golden glint appearing in his brown irises. The surge of power triggered another partial shift, and his reindeer ears popped out, immediately collecting their own coating of flour. Duck, he shouted, as the bowl of enchanted frosting decided to join the rebellion. Streams of buttercream shot across the kitchen like sugary comets. Flicker, Lumi's enchanted oven mitt, zoomed around trying to intercept the frosting missiles, leaving trails of sparks in its wake. Through the pandemonium, Dax spotted a jar of vanilla extract teetering on the edge of the counter. His eyes locked on the label, Moonlight Distilled Madagascar Vanilla, 100 gold pieces per drop. Without thinking, he launched himself across the flour-slick floor. Got it, he called triumphantly, sliding past Lumi with the precious jar clutched to his chest. His victory was short-lived as his feet went out from under him, sending him sprawling in the mess of flour. Lumi reached down to help him up, her warm hand clasping his. The moment their skin touched, magical static crackled between them. The remaining bowl of frosting, already unstable from the chaos, exploded in a spectacular fountain of sweetness. They stood frozen in the aftermath, surveying the destruction. Dax's usually sandy hair had gone completely white with flour, while streaks of pink frosting decorated Lumi's fiery locks like festive highlights. He tried to maintain his dignity, but the corner of his mouth twitched traitorously. From his place against the wall, Blaze made a sound that could only be described as a mechanical snicker. You've got a little something. Dax gestured vaguely at Lumi's hair, then attempted to brush some flour off his own face. He succeeded only in smearing a streak of chocolate frosting across his cheek. Okay, so maybe my great-great-grandmother's baking genes skipped a few generations. Lumi surveyed the disaster zone that was once her pristine kitchen. Flour coated every surface like fresh snow, and streaks of magical frosting glowed in defiance of gravity along the walls. She picked up an empty container of enchanted vanilla and sighed. Well, that's just perfect. She rifled through her supplies, each cabinet revealing another depleted ingredient. My entire stock of magical essentials, gone. Poof. Like they were never here. Gone? Dax peered over her shoulder, close enough that she could smell the lingering scent of peppermint and winter pine that seemed to follow him everywhere. As in completely gone? No, they've just turned invisible for fun. Lumi rolled her eyes. Yes, gone. Between your reindeer rampage and that mixer rebellion, we used up everything trying to salvage what we could. But instead of looking properly chastised, Dax's face lit up like an enchanted Christmas tree. This is perfect. Your definition of perfect needs serious revision. No, really. He bounced on his heels, sending a shower of sparkles from his flour-dusted hair. As the Bake-Off planner, I have special access to the enchanted pantry market. VIP passes and everything. Lumi paused in her attempt to wrangle a particularly stubborn glob of frosting off the ceiling. The market? You mean the one that's usually closed to the public, except during the summer solstice? The very same. Dax pulled out his wallet, extracted a business card that somehow transformed into a snowflake and back again. I can get us in right now. They've got everything. Crystallized moonlight extract, frost-fermented vanilla beans, even those rare shadow-spun sugar crystals you can't find anywhere else. The offer was tempting. Extremely tempting. But I need to change first. I look like I lost a fight with a flour mill. She gestured at her clothes, which were now more white than black. Meet at the market entrance in an hour? Dax suggested, trying and failing to brush some of the magical frosting from his hair. It seemed determined to stay, leaving behind a faint sparkle that made him look like he'd been attacked by a festive glitter bomb. Fine. But bring those passes and don't be late. Lumi's apron shifted from its frustrated red to a more determined orange. And try to look less. She waved vaguely at his entire sparkly persona. Devastatingly handsome? He grinned. I was going to say like you fell into a fairy's craft supplies, but sure, go with that. An hour later, Lumi stood at the market entrance, now properly cleaned up and wearing fresh clothes. Her mood-changing apron had settled into a bright, determined orange that matched her ember-bright eyes. The winter air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and magic that always seemed stronger near the market's boundaries. Dax was already there, leaning against an invisible barrier with casual grace. Despite his obvious attempts to clean up, his hair still sparkled faintly in the winter sunlight. He held up 2 crystalline passes that looked like frozen starlight caught in glass. Your VIP access awaits, my lady, he said with an exaggerated bow. Call me my lady again, and I'll show you exactly how hot demon fire burns. But she couldn't quite hide her smile as she reached for one of the passes. The moment their magical signatures came into proximity, the passes sparked like mini fireworks. Red and silver light danced between them, causing Dax to nearly drop them. Oops. Should have mentioned, the passes are a bit sensitive to magical energy. He managed to pin his to his jacket, without setting anything on fire. There are a few rules we need to follow inside. No shifting, which means I have to resist the urge to go full reindeer, even if someone has amazing antler decorations for sale. Is that a common problem for you? Lumi asked, securing her own pass. You'd be surprised how many things look like they'd make excellent antler accessories. He continued listing rules as they walked. No unauthorized magic use. They're pretty strict about that one after the Great Gingerbread Uprising of 12. And all purchases have to be registered with the vendor guild. As they approached the market's entrance, their passes began to pulse with increasing brightness. Lumi's cast a warm ember-like glow, while Dax's shimmered with silver light. The magical barrier before them, invisible until now, began to reveal itself as a curtain of crystalline frost. Ready? Dax asked, offering his arm with another grin. Lumi ignored the offered arm, but couldn't help returning his smile. Ready to shop? Always. Ready to spend more time with you? The jury's still out. The barrier parted before them like a curtain of diamond dust, revealing a sight that made even Lumi's carefully maintained composure slip. The enchanted marketplace sprawled out in all its magical glory. Floating lanterns of rainbow fire illuminated stalls that seemed to defy physics, while vendors of every magical species hawked their wares. The air was thick with the scent of exotic spices and raw magic, and somewhere in the distance, a chorus of frost sprites sang what sounded suspiciously like a jazzy version of Let It Snow. Welcome, Dax said with genuine warmth, to the enchanted pantry market. Try not to set anything on fire. They're really strict about their no flames policy in the ribbon section. Chapter 3, Magic in the Air. The enchanted pantry market shimmered into existence as Lumi stepped through the crystalline barrier, her breath catching at the kaleidoscope of magical lights dancing overhead. Floating lanterns bobbed between stalls like lazy fireflies, casting rainbow shadows across displays of bottled starlight and crystallized dreams. Impressive, right? Dax grinned, ducking under a string of chiming bells that seemed to ring in harmony with his presence. Lumi refused to admit he was right, even if the market did make her inner baker practically purr with delight. Let's just get what we need and get out. A willowy fay with dragonfly wings materialized before them, her silver hair floating as if underwater. Frost-spun sugar, perhaps? Perfect for enchanted confections. She held out a gossamer bag that sparkled like fresh snow. Actually, yes. Lumi reached for her wallet, but the Fi vendor waved her off. For the lovely couple, a special blend. The Fi's knowing smile made Lumi's cheeks heat as she sprinkled extra shimmer over their shopping bags. Before Lumi could correct the vendor's assumption, she'd vanished in a swirl of sparkles. "We should check out the honey next," Dax suggested, pointing to a display where golden drops hung suspended in midair. "The crystallized kind would be perfect for my recipe," Lumi cut him off, already moving toward the stall. She made it exactly 3 steps before an invisible force yanked her backward, nearly sending her crashing into Dax's chest. "Whoa." He steadied her with warm hands on her shoulders. "You okay?" "I'm fine." Lumi straightened her apron, which had shifted to display tiny flames. "Just got caught on something." They continued shopping, gathering moonbeam-infused vanilla and star-blessed cinnamon, but something felt off. Their shopping bags kept drifting closer together like magnets, no matter how Lumi tried to keep her distance. The truth became apparent when Dax wandered over to examine a display of thunderclap cocoa. One moment he was reaching for a sample, the next he was being dragged back to Lumi's side with a yelp. "The bags?" Lumi groaned, finally noticing the faint silver threads connecting their purchases. "That sneaky Fi enchanted them." "Can't you burn through it?" Dax suggested, attempting to stretch the invisible tether. Lumi summoned a small flame, but the magical bond only sparkled mockingly. Dax tried shifting partially into his reindeer form, his antlers materializing briefly, but that just made the connection pulse with amusement. Nearby vendors poorly concealed their giggles behind glamoured fans and floating ledgers. "This is ridiculous," Lumi muttered as they squeezed through a narrow aisle of bottled aurora lights. The magical tether forced them to move in awkward synchronization, like participants in a 3-legged race neither had signed up for. "At least we're getting to know each other better," Dax joked as another tight turn pressed them together. His warmth seeped through her sleeve, smelling frustratingly like pine needles and winter nights. "I already know enough," Lumi grumbled, just as Dax's elbow caught a display of floating peppermint leaves. The enchanted herbs swirled around them in a miniature snowstorm, catching in her hair and clinging to Dax's flannel shirt. The market seemed to conspire against them. Stalls mysteriously rearranged to create narrow passages, forcing them to press close together. A cart of weather-in bottles appeared out of nowhere, requiring careful maneuvering that had Lumi practically tucked under Dax's arm. When they reached for the last bottle of midnight harvested frost flowers simultaneously, their fingers brushed. Magical sparks crackled between them, making the bottle chime like crystal bells. The display of weather-in bottles fogged up instantly, and Lumi swore she heard more fairy laughter. "We should probably share it," Dax suggested, his voice oddly soft. "Since we're stuck together anyway." Lumi snatched her hand back, ignoring how the loss of contact left her fingers tingling. "Fine. But I'm using most of it." They made their way to the enchanted spice section, the last stop on their list. Despite Lumi's best efforts to maintain personal space, their shoulders kept brushing as they examined bottles of Dragon's Breath chili and Phoenix Ash cinnamon. Each touch sent little shivers of magic dancing across her skin, and her apron's pattern had shifted to swirling snowflakes with tiny hearts hidden in their centers. "The Phoenix Ash is essential," she said, mainly to distract herself from how the market's enchanted lighting made Dax's eyes look like warm honey. "It'll help stabilize the magical properties of the cake." "Like you stabilize my chaos?" Dax teased, reaching past her for a jar of crystallized lightning. "I don't stabilize anything about you," Lumi retorted, even as their shopping bags cuddled closer together. "You're a walking disaster zone." "A disaster zone who got you VIP access to the market," he reminded her, grinning as their magically enforced proximity caused a nearby rack of bottled rainbows to ripple with new colors. Lumi huffed, but couldn't argue with that. Even if being tethered to Dax was driving her crazy, the market's magical ingredients would definitely give her cake the edge she needed. If only the enchanted tether didn't make her so aware of his every movement, his irritatingly charming smile, and the way his magical signature seemed to harmonize with hers despite her best efforts to resist. Dax weaved through the market's winding paths, acutely aware of Lumi's presence beside him as their magically bound bags forced them to stay in step. The rare ingredients section beckoned from a secluded corner, its protective wards casting rainbow-like ripples across shelves of bottled starlight and crystallized wishes. "The good stuff's back here," he said, trying to sound casual despite the way his magic tingled beneath his skin. "Just, don't touch anything without asking first. Some of these ingredients can be a little temperamental." As they approached, the wards flickered and wavered like a mirage. Dax quickly raised his hand, channeling his energy to stabilize them, but not before Lumi shot him a look that was equal parts suspicion and curiosity. "Does that happen often?" she asked, gesturing to the still shimmering barrier. "Only on particularly magical days," he deflected with a grin. "Or when Mercury's in retrograde. Or when the moon is waxing. Or waning. Actually, pretty much any time the moon exists." Dax reached for the shelf where the frostberry extract sat in delicate crystalline vials, its contents swirling with ethereal blue light. His sleeve rode up, revealing the charm bracelet he usually kept hidden. The official Bake-Off runes carved into its surface sparked and swirled in decidedly unofficial patterns. "Is that?" Lumi started, her ember-bright eyes narrowing. The vial slipped through his suddenly clumsy fingers. Dax lunged to catch it, his concentration slipping just enough that he felt the familiar tingle of antlers trying to manifest. He managed to snag the extract before it shattered, but not before Lumi got an eyeful of his partially shifted state. Just a magical hiccup. He straightened up, willing his antlers away. "Happens to the best of us. Why, this one time at Reindeer school." Another spark shot from his bracelet, cutting off his rambling. The runes spun faster, their usual golden glow taking on an almost sickly green tinge. Their bags chose that moment to give a particularly strong tug, sending Lumi stumbling into him. She caught herself with one hand against his chest, the other gripping the shelf behind him. The position effectively trapped him between her fierce gaze and a display of bottled aurora borealis. "Spill it, Blitzen. What's wrong with your bake-off charm?" "Rom? Nothing's wrong. Just some minor technical difficulties. You know how temperamental magical bureaucracy can be." He tried to edge sideways, but the bags weren't having it. "It's probably just a temporary flux in the arcane matrices. Or maybe seasonal interference from all the holiday magic." Above them, a shelf of weather spheres began to react, clouds swirling within their glass confines before breaking free. A miniature snowstorm formed over their heads, dusting them both with magical frost. "Chaotic energy readings?" Lumi's voice was sharp as she picked up on his slip. "What exactly is going on with the competition's enchantments?" "Did I say chaotic? I meant dramatic. Very dramatic readings. Lots of," he gestured vaguely, accidentally brushing against a shelf of moonlight essences. The bottles wobbled ominously. "Holiday spirit? Nothing that would affect the actual competition, of course." Lumi opened her mouth to press further, but their bags suddenly yanked them toward the market exit with enough force to make them both stumble. Dax caught her elbow to steady her, acutely aware of how the contact sent sparks of magic dancing between them. "We should probably head back," he said quickly. "These ingredients won't preserve themselves, and I'm sure you're eager to start working on that cake again." But the look in Lumi's eyes as she let herself be pulled along told him this conversation was far from over. Her baker's intuition had caught the scent of something amiss, and like a hound with a bone, she wasn't going to let it go easily. The weather sphere's snow continued to follow them, creating a trail of magical flurries in their wake. Dax tried not to think about how the malfunction perfectly matched the swirling chaos in his charm bracelet, or how he was going to explain any of this without revealing just how badly he'd messed up the Bake-Off's foundational magic. His antlers threatened to manifest again, as he caught Lumi studying his bracelet out of the corner of her eye. He'd have to be more careful. The last thing he needed was for anyone to discover that the town's beloved baking competition was one magical mishap away from becoming a full-blown culinary catastrophe. But with Lumi's suspicious gaze burning into him, and his own chaotic magic growing more unstable by the day, Dax had a sinking feeling his secret wouldn't stay hidden for long. Especially not with the way their magically bound bags kept finding excuses to push them together, as if the Fi's enchantment was determined to make his life as complicated as possible. Chapter 4: A Sticky Situation. Lumi squinted at the delicate measuring spoons hovering above her mixing bowl, willing them to stay steady as she prepared to add the frostberry extract. Behind her, Dax shifted his weight from one foot to the other, carefully maintaining his position behind the cinnamon line she'd drawn across the floor tiles. "Stop fidgeting," she muttered, not taking her eyes off the iridescent blue liquid. "Your magic is making everything wobble." "Sorry." He stilled immediately, though the measuring spoons continued their subtle dance. "It's just exciting watching you work. Like a cooking show, but with more chance of explosion." Blaze's temperature gauge swung wildly between hot and cold, his metal frame creaking. "I don't mean to alarm anyone," the oven interjected, "but there's an unusual magical resonance building in here." "It's fine," Lumi insisted, though her ember-orange eyes narrowed at the way the extract seemed to shimmer more intensely than usual. "Dax, hand me the enchanted vanilla, please." Carefully. He took one step over the cinnamon line, arm extended with the vanilla bottle. The moment their fingers brushed during the handoff, a spark of winter magic collided with her natural fire energy. The batter in the bowl shuddered, then began to rise like a soufflé gone rogue. Flicker, her enchanted oven mitt started frantically waving from its hook by the stove. The batter pulsed with swirls of orange and silver, developing what looked disturbingly like eyes made of bubbles. "That's not supposed to happen," Lumi breathed, horror mounting as the mixture began to quiver with increasing intensity. "Maybe it just needs a gentle stir?" Dax suggested, reaching for a spoon. "Don't." Too late. The batter launched itself from the bowl with surprising force, leaving delicate frost patterns on the counter while simultaneously releasing puffs of steam. Dax yelped, instinctively shifting halfway into his reindeer form. His newly manifested antlers caught the shelf above, sending an avalanche of specialty sprinkles raining down. The batter, as if delighted by this development, split into multiple smaller globules, each one catching the falling decorations until they resembled disco balls made of dough. "My Italian crystal sugar," Lumi cried as one particularly enthusiastic blob bounced off the ceiling with a clear ding note. Another hit the counter with a bong, and a third ricocheted off Blaze's door with a perfect ping. "They're making music?" Dax's ears, now distinctly more reindeer-like, twitched at each note. Blaze swung his door open wide. "Quick! In here before they..." The musical batter blobs froze mid-bounce, their bubble eyes growing comically wide at the sight of the oven's dark interior. Then, as one, they began bouncing with renewed vigor, clearly terrified of being baked. "Oh, brilliant idea," Lumi snapped as her hair burst into flames. She dove across the kitchen, shielding her remaining expensive ingredients with her body, as two blobs performed an impressive synchronized swimming routine through the air above her head. "Threaten the sentient batter with baking." "I'm trying to help." Dax raised his hands, winter magic swirling around his fingers as he attempted to herd the batter away from Lumi's storage shelves. The largest blob paused, then reformed itself into a wobbly reindeer shape, complete with sprinkle-studded antlers. It pranced in place, mimicking Dax's movements and leaving trails of both flour and frost in its wake. "This is not helping." Lumi thrust her hands out, creating a barrier of flames to contain the chaos. The batter reindeer absorbed the heat, its eyes growing even bubblier. Then, to her absolute horror, it began sliding across her pristine counters in what could only be described as a conga line, knocking over her precisely organized piping tips and fondant tools. "Conga!" The other blobs joined in, bouncing in rhythm while continuing their musical performance. One particularly small blob had somehow mastered percussion, using her best copper bowls. Lumi found herself backed into the center of the kitchen, nearly colliding with Dax, who'd been driven to the same spot. They stood back to back, watching their creation wreak havoc on the kitchen. "Well," Dax said brightly, "at least they have good rhythm?" From his perch, Flicker produced a tiny white flag and waved it in surrender. Blaze's entire frame shook with what Lumi knew was definitely laughter, the traitor. "When this is over," Lumi growled, watching as the conga line started a second lap of her kitchen, "we are having a serious discussion about magical contamination protocols." "Agreed," Dax nodded, ducking as a blob attempted to place a makeshift crown of sprinkles on his head. "But maybe we should focus on catching them first?" They seemed to be starting a conga line flash mob. The batter reindeer, now wearing what appeared to be a bow tie made of crystallized sugar, winked at them with its bubble eyes, and began conducting its choir of bouncing batter bits in what sounded suspiciously like a jazzy rendition of Jingle Bells. Lumi's eye twitched as she watched her kitchen descend further into musical chaos. "I don't suppose your family curse came with an instruction manual for dealing with enchanted rebellious batter?" "Afraid not," Dax admitted, reaching out to catch a blob that was attempting to juggle her expensive vanilla beans. "Though I have to say, this is a new one even for me." The musical number reached a crescendo, with the batter reindeer leading its merry band in a grand finale that involved spinning across her ceiling in increasingly elaborate patterns. Flicker had given up completely and was now using its tiny white flag to conduct the performance. Dax watched the enchanted batter perform its impromptu musical number across Lumi's kitchen, complete with synchronized swimming routines in midair. Any other time he might have found it hilarious, the way the golden blobs had formed a conga line, chirping what sounded suspiciously like hot cross buns in squeaky voices. But Lumi's expression promised imminent incineration if he didn't fix this mess. "I swear this isn't what usually happens when I bake," he said, ducking as a particularly enthusiastic blob attempted a pirouette over his head. "Really?" Lumi's hair flickered with crimson flames. "Because this seems exactly like something that would happen around you." The chaos was familiar, the way his magic tended to turn even simple tasks into spectacular disasters. But for once, Dax didn't want to lean into the mayhem. He'd promised to help, and beneath his easy grin, he was tired of being the family screw-up. Taking a deep breath, he let his antlers materialize fully. Instead of their usual erratic sparkle, they began to glow with a steady, crystalline light. The weight felt grounding, connecting him to generations of Blitzen magic. "You might want to step back," he said, his voice losing its usual playful edge. When Lumi raised an eyebrow but complied, he closed his eyes briefly, centering himself the way his grandmother had taught him during those secret midnight baking lessons. The silver tips of his antlers began to hum, a sound like winter wind through ice crystals. As he opened his eyes, now focused with rare intensity, delicate threads of frost magic wove through the air. The musical batter paused mid-chorus, their bubble eyes blinking curiously at this unexpected development. Dax moved with a grace that surprised even himself, his hands flowing through the patterns his grandmother had drilled into him during long winter nights. "Baking isn't just about the ingredients," she'd always said. "It's about the intention you weave into every step." He combined traditional baking charms with his family's winter magic, creating spirals of frost that sparkled in the kitchen's warm light. The rogue batter responded to his focused energy, their erratic dancing slowing as frost patterns began to stabilize their magical structure. Each blob's glow softened from manic brightness to a gentle shimmer. From the corner of his eye, Dax caught Lumi's expression shifting from irritation to something that looked remarkably like admiration. He didn't dare break his concentration to confirm it, though. Instead, he continued guiding the batter back toward the bowl, creating a gentle cascade of snowflakes that seemed to soothe the mixture's wild magic. Blaze's usually dramatic flames dimmed to an impressed flicker as the kitchen's temperature gradually normalized under Dax's controlled winter influence. The oven gave what sounded suspiciously like an approving hum. One final blob of batter made a break for freedom, attempting to squeeze through a crack in the window. Without breaking his rhythm, Dax shifted just his hands into their reindeer form. Hooves weren't exactly practical for baking, but they conducted magic beautifully. He used the enhanced connection to guide the escapee back to its brothers, who had settled contentedly into the bowl. The entire mixture stopped glowing but maintained a soft, pleasant hum whenever Dax moved near. He flexed his fingers as they shifted back to human form, trying not to show how much the precise magic control had taken out of him. Lumi approached the bowl, with the caution of someone who'd seen too many baking disasters. Her ember-orange eyes widened as she tested the batter with the tendril of her fire magic. The two energies mixed perfectly, creating a brief sparkle of gold. As his antlers faded away, Dax's confident smirk returned, though it felt different this time, more earned than automatic. Flicker, Lumi's enchanted oven mitt, gave him an enthusiastic thumbs up from its perch on the spice rack. Not completely hopeless after all, Lumi muttered, though she quickly busied herself with checking the batter's consistency when Dax glanced her way. I do occasionally know what I'm doing, he said, leaning against the counter in what he hoped was a casual manner and not an obvious attempt to keep his suddenly shaky legs from giving out. My grandmother might have taught me a thing or two about magical baking. The batter gave a happy little burble, as if agreeing with him. Lumi poked it suspiciously with a spoon, but the mixture just swirled obligingly into perfect peaks. Your grandmother? Lumi's tone was carefully neutral, but Dax caught the curiosity in her glance. The famous Blitzen family baker? The very same. He ran a hand through his hair, dislodging a few lingering snowflakes. Though she probably wouldn't approve of how I usually use her lessons. You mean turning them into magical disasters? I prefer to think of them as unexpected creative opportunities. The familiar joke felt hollow, though. After that display of control, it was harder to hide behind his usual chaotic persona. The batter hummed a few bars of what might have been a thank you song, significantly more melodious than its earlier performance. Dax noticed Lumi fighting back a smile as she began preparing the cake pans. Chapter 5: The Reindeer Reveal. Lumi slumped onto a stool at her kitchen's prep counter, every muscle aching from their battle with the possessed batter. Her mood-changing apron, still splattered with evidence of their earlier chaos, shifted from frazzled orange to a contemplative blue. Across the counter, Dax stirred his hot chocolate with uncharacteristic focus, as if the swirling liquid held answers to questions she hadn't thought to ask. Steam rose from their mugs in lazy spirals, dancing in the kitchen's ambient magic. Lumi watched, fascinated despite herself, as the vapors from her cinnamon hot chocolate twisted into tiny flame dancers, pirouetting above her cup. Above Dax's mug, miniature reindeer pranced through his steam clouds, their delicate forms galloping in endless loops. Blaze, perhaps sensing the shift in mood, dimmed his flames to a cozy orange glow that bathed the kitchen in warm light. The gentle atmosphere seemed to relax Dax enough that his magic slipped, just slightly, and silver-tipped antlers shimmered into existence above his head. They promptly knocked into the jar of marshmallows perched on the shelf behind him. The marshmallows bounced across the counter in perfect rhythm to Dax's mortified expression, each hop punctuated by a tiny plink that sounded suspiciously like a waltz. So, Lumi said, corralling the dancing marshmallows with one hand, that thing you did earlier with the batter? That was some impressive control. Dax's attention snapped to his hot chocolate, as if it had suddenly become the most fascinating thing in the room. Tiny snowflakes began falling around his shoulders, disappearing before they could land on his flannel shirt. Oh, that? Just got lucky, probably. Please. I've seen enough magical accidents to know the difference between luck and skill. She raised an eyebrow as he traced frost patterns on his mug, deliberately avoiding her gaze. The joking sparkle that usually lit his eyes had dimmed, replaced by something more vulnerable. It's kind of a family thing, he said finally. The Blitzen curse, we call it. Though chaos incarnate might be more accurate. The candy cane chandelier above them, a holiday decoration she'd enchanted last week, flickered its lights in sympathy as Dax continued. Every generation of Blitzens has dealt with it. Makes our magic go haywire, especially during strong emotions or around other magical energies. My sister once turned our entire house into gingerbread during a tantrum. We had to live in a hotel for a week while the reversal spell took effect. Lumi's ember-orange eyes softened as Dax described his grandmother, a stern but patient woman who'd spent years teaching him complex control techniques. Most shifters just think about changing and it happens. I had to learn 17 different meditation techniques just to keep my antlers from popping out during business meetings. Flicker, who'd been unusually quiet until now, floated over to pat Dax's hand consolingly. As if to prove his point about emotional triggers, Dax's hot chocolate responded to the gentle gesture by swirling into a perfect whirlpool, complete with tiny chocolate sea monsters breaching the surface. "It's not all bad though," he added, a hint of his usual humor returning. "My cousin once accidentally enchanted all the furniture to do the Macarena during a family reunion. Grandma was so impressed with the synchronized choreography, she couldn't even be mad." Their magical energies, which had been crackling with antagonism earlier, now swirled together more gently. The kitchen's ambient magic picked up the shift, painting aurora-like patterns across the walls in soft greens and golds. Dax launched into more family stories, each one more ridiculous than the last, until Lumi found herself relaxing despite her earlier irritation. "I get it," she said quietly, when his latest tale about a mishap with self-juggling ornaments wound down. "The constant vigilance thing. One wrong move and suddenly everything's on fire." Her ash-like freckles glowed faintly as she admitted, "Do you know how many fireproof charms I have layered into this building? 37. And I still sometimes wake up to find my pillowcase has combusted because I had a spicy dream about jalapeno poppers." "Jalapeno poppers?" Dax's eyebrows shot up. "Should I be concerned about your dating life?" "Hey, some of us have very specific tastes," Lumi shot back, but there was no heat in it. The tension between them had shifted, morphed into something closer to understanding. They both knew what it was like to live one emotional hiccup away from magical disaster. In her mug, the tiny flame dancers had paired up with Dax's reindeer, creating an impossible ballet of fire and frost. It should have been chaotic. Their magics were practically opposites, but somehow the combination worked. A small splash drew her attention back to Dax, whose marshmallows had apparently decided to start a synchronized swimming routine in his hot chocolate. They dove and surfaced in perfect formation, leaving tiny wake patterns across the surface. Lumi surprised herself with a genuine laugh, her hair sparking with amusement rather than anger for the first time since they'd met. "Okay, you have to teach me how you did that one. I've got some gingerbread men who could use swimming lessons." Dax's fingers traced the intricate patterns of his charm bracelet, a family heirloom that suddenly felt as heavy as his growing guilt. The metal sparked and fizzed beneath his touch, sending errant wisps of holiday magic into the air. Behind him, a whisk and wooden spoon pirouetted across the counter in an impromptu waltz. "So, funny story about this bracelet." He cleared his throat, watching frost patterns creep across the bakery windows like delicate lace. The familiar tingling sensation at his temples warned him seconds before his antlers manifested, all thanks to the anxiety churning in his stomach. "It's not just decorative." The charm pulsed with an unstable light, projecting flickering scenes onto the bakery walls. Past winners hoisting the golden whisk trophy amid cheering crowds. Children tossing enchanted snowballs during the Frostlight Festival. The massive talking Christmas tree in Silver Bell Square, serenading passers-by with carols. Each image wavered and distorted like old film left too long in the sun. The charm is connected to Snowmelt Hollow's winter magic. His voice cracked slightly as Blaze's usually orange flames suddenly flared emerald green. "And it's well breaking." Lumi crossed her arms, her ember orange eyes narrowing. "Breaking how exactly?" The playful smirk he usually wore slipped completely from his face. Without this charm anchoring the bake-off's magic, all the holiday enchantments in town could start unraveling. "We're talking more than just a ruined competition." His chaotic magic responded to his distress, conjuring tiny snow flurries that swirled around them both like miniature worry storms. Lumi stepped closer, her professional curiosity evident as she studied the malfunctioning charm. Her fingers, still dusted with flour from their earlier baking attempt, reached out as if she could feel the magical disruption in the air. "I've tried everything," Dax continued, his frustration mounting. The magical surge hit without warning, and suddenly he was shifting forms, antlers expanding, hands becoming hooves, then back again in a disorienting blur. He stumbled backward, knocking over 2 chairs with his temporarily manifested tail. Sorry, this happens when I'm... The charm bracelet reacted violently to his magical fluctuation. A pulse of energy exploded outward, and every granule of sugar in the bakery transformed into tiny crystalline snowflakes. They rose into the air, forming a chorus line that began singing "Let It Snow" in squeaky, off-key voices. "Oh, come on," Dax groaned, trying to wrangle his magic back under control. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. The charm's supposed to help regulate the holiday magic in town, but instead it's amplifying every magical hiccup into a full-blown disaster." Lumi reached up to catch one of the singing snowflakes on her finger, her expression thoughtful as it belted out a particularly enthusiastic high note. "And you waited until now to mention this because I was hoping I could fix it myself." Dax ran a hand through his hair, dislodging a few snowflakes that had settled there. "But every attempt just makes it worse. Last week I tried a stabilizing spell, and accidentally turned all the street lamps in Silverbell Square into candy canes. The week before that, I ended up giving the talking Christmas tree a British accent, which honestly made it even more sarcastic than usual." Above them, the candy cane chandelier began playing a nervous tune that sounded suspiciously like Jingle Bells, performed by an anxious accordion. Dax took a deep breath, forcing himself to meet Lumi's gaze. "That's why I came to you specifically. It's not just about making amends for the cake anymore." His golden-flecked eyes held a mix of hope and desperation. "Your fire magic, combined with your expertise in magical baking. I think you might be the only person who can help stabilize the charm before everything falls apart." The singing snowflakes hit their final chorus, their voices fading as they began to melt in the warmth of the bakery. Blaze's flames flickered uncertainly, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Through the frosted windows, the eternal snowfall of Snowmelt Hollow continued its gentle descent, unaware that its magical nature hung in the balance. Dax waited, his antlers casting branching shadows across the floor as Lumi processed everything he just revealed. The charm bracelet hummed against his wrist, a constant reminder of the responsibility he'd been trying and failing to shoulder alone. "So when you crashed into my bakery earlier," Lumi started. "I was actually trying to find a way to ask for your help," Dax admitted, watching as one last sugar snowflake performed a solo rendition of Winter Wonderland before dissolving. "Though I'll admit, face planting into your candy cane display wasn't part of the original plan." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the anxious melody still emanating from the chandelier above. Dax's magic swirled restlessly, causing small eddies of sparkles to dance around his feet. Everything, the bake-off, the town's holiday spirit, possibly even the eternal snowfall that gave Snowmelt Hollow its charm, depended on what Lumi decided next. Chapter 6: A Frosty Alliance. Lumi pulled her enchanted apron tighter as she and Dax stepped into the town square, where enchanted snowballs whizzed through the air like sugar-charged shooting stars. Each one left a trail of sparkles and snippets of holiday songs. Everything from Jingle Bells to Silent Night played in chaotic overlapping fragments. "Well, this is festive," she muttered, watching a particularly enthusiastic snowball perform a loop-de-loop while belting out "All I Want for Christmas Is You" in a squeaky soprano. The charm's definitely gone haywire. Dax ducked as a snowball zoomed past his ear, trailing tinsel. Usually they just float gently down and hum carols. Lumi's apron shifted to a determined shade of purple. With a subtle twist of her magic, she created a barrier of warmth around them. The next volley of snowballs dissolved into harmless puffs of steam before they could make contact. "Show off," Dax grinned. A streak of ice blue shot past them, followed by the sound of bells. The Frostling twins zipped by on slides made of crystallized frost, their matching grins spelling trouble. As they passed, nearby snowballs sprouted tiny wings and began dive-bombing the crowd with renewed enthusiasm. "Duck." Lumi yanked Dax behind a lamppost as a squadron of winged snowballs performed an aerial assault on a group of shoppers. Dax's charm bracelet pulsed with an erratic golden light, its magic sending out waves that made the enchanted snow react in increasingly bizarre ways. Several snowballs near them transformed into tiny, perfectly formed snowmen, each one no bigger than a coffee cup. They immediately launched into a squeaky rendition of Deck the Halls. "Your magic's making it worse," Lumi hissed, but she couldn't help smiling at the miniature choir. "Sorry?" Dax shook his wrist, trying to calm the bracelet. "It's been acting up ever since the charm started malfunctioning." Lumi took a deep breath and focused her fire magic in a new way. Instead of heat, she channeled it like a detection spell, letting the warmth seek out traces of magical tampering. Her ember-orange eyes began to glow as she picked up suspicious patterns in the square's enchanted atmosphere. A group of children, caught up in the festive chaos, launched a coordinated snowball attack at Dax. He yelped, partially shifting in surprise, his ears elongating and antlers sprouting, and created a defensive mini blizzard. Unfortunately, this only resulted in all the nearby snowballs sprouting tiny silver antlers of their own. "Really?" Lumi arched an eyebrow at him. "They're kind of cute," Dax offered weakly as an antlered snowball pranced through the air. Following the magical traces, Lumi discovered something concerning. Glowing threads of fine magic were woven through the charmed structure, visible only to her enhanced sight. "These aren't supposed to be here," she said, reaching out to examine a particularly bright strand. "They're pranking spells." "Let me guess, with a distinctly frostling flavor?" "Exactly. The twins have been." A barrage of especially mischievous snowballs cut her off, forcing them to dive behind the nearest cover. They found themselves pressed together behind an enchanted ice sculpture of a prancing reindeer. Where Lumi's warmth met Dax's winter magic, a perfect sphere of protection formed around them. For once, their opposing powers weren't fighting, they were working in harmony. "This is new," Dax whispered, his breath fogging in the air between them. Lumi tried to ignore how close they were standing, or how his eyes seemed to catch every sparkle of magic in the square. "Focus. We can use this. If we combine our magic, we might be able to trace the full extent of the tampering." Together they moved through the square, following a trail of magical mischief that the Frostling twins had left like a path of glittering breadcrumbs. Lumi's fire magic revealed layers of enchantment, none of it malicious, but all of it designed to create maximum chaos. They weren't trying to ruin anything, Lumi realized, examining a particularly complex knot of spells. They just wanted to make the holiday celebrations more exciting. But their magic is interfering with the town's magical framework in ways they probably didn't expect. "That tracks," Dax nodded. "The twins never think through the consequences of their, oh no." "Oh no what?" A shadow fell over them. Lumi looked up to see that all the enchanted snowballs in the square had begun to merge together, forming an enormous sphere of singing, sparkling snow. The giant snowball developed what appeared to be a face, complete with a mischievous grin made of icicles. "Run!" Dax grabbed her hand as the massive snow sphere began rolling through the square, sending townspeople scrambling for cover. Its booming voice somehow managed to sing all the Christmas carols at once, creating a holiday cacophony that made Lumi's ears ring. As they sprinted past the fountain, Lumi caught sight of two ice-blue figures zipping away on frost slides, their laughter echoing like silver bells. The Frostling twins had some explaining to do, assuming she and Dax survived being chased by their musical snow monster first. Dax was scanning the enchanted snow-covered square for signs of tampering, when a familiar bell-like giggle echoed through the crisp winter air. His stomach dropped as the Frostling twins materialized atop the central ice fountain, their matching grins spelling trouble. Their snowflake tattoos pulsed with an eerie blue light that made his antlers tingle. "Well, if it isn't our favorite chaos-cursed reindeer," Icy called down, her voice chiming like ice crystals in the wind. Crystal finished her sister's thought. "And look, he's brought a little flame to our snowball fight." Dax's enhanced reindeer senses picked up the subtle shift in magical energy before he saw it, dozens of snowballs forming in the air around the twins, all aimed at Lumi. Without conscious thought, his body responded to the threat. The partial shift came naturally, his shoulders broadening and antlers sprouting as he stepped in front of Lumi. "Get down." He guided her behind him with one arm, his newly transformed body creating a protective barrier between her and the incoming assault. The twins launched their attack with precise synchronization. The enchanted snowballs didn't just fly, they danced through the air in intricate patterns, some spinning like frozen shuriken while others pulsed with concentrated winter magic. A few sparked with what looked suspiciously like lightning. "Since when do snowballs come with special effects?" Dax muttered, calling on his winter magic. For once, his usually chaotic power responded with perfect clarity, forming a protective dome around them both. The snowballs exploded against it in bursts of sparkles and frost. "Show off," Lumi muttered behind him, but he caught the impressed note in her voice. His moment of pride was short-lived as the twins split up, taking positions on opposite sides of the square. Dax pivoted, trying to track both threats while maintaining the shield. His antlers nearly caught Lumi in the face as he turned. "Sorry? Still getting used to the extra hardware up there. Maybe warn a girl before you go full reindeer on," Lumi's quip cut off with a sharp intake of breath as an ice shard pierced through his shield, whistling past them both. Dax reacted on instinct, pulling her closer against his chest. His magic shifted automatically, adapting to accommodate the warmth of her fire magic without suppressing it. The sensation was oddly familiar, like hot chocolate on a snowy day. Then he noticed the thin cut on her cheek, a bead of blood bright against her skin. His protective instincts flared, and with them, his magic surged stronger. The shield crystallized into something more solid, more focused than any magic he'd ever produced. "I've got you," he murmured, not sure if he was reassuring her or himself. The twins redoubled their efforts, pelting them with a barrage that would have buried lesser magical beings. But Dax maintained his hold on Lumi, finding an unexpected grace in his movements as he deflected attack after attack. His usual clumsiness had vanished, replaced by something that felt almost natural. A warm tingle at his wrist caught his attention. His charm bracelet, the one that helped regulate the Bake-Off's magic, was glowing, resonating with his protective spell. Ribbons of light spiraled up from it, creating waves of color that danced around them like the northern lights. The effect was beautiful, turning their magical shelter into a kaleidoscope of winter colors. Dax felt Lumi shift against him, her hair beginning to crackle with that distinctive fire demon energy he'd come to admire. Instead of trying to shield her completely, he adjusted his stance, opening up space for her to move while maintaining the protective dome. "Ready to show these twins what happens when winter magic meets hellfire?" he asked. The grin she flashed him was answer enough. Her fingers sparked as she gathered her power, and Dax found himself matching her movements instinctively, their magics weaving together in a way that felt perfectly right. Above them, Icy and Crystal exchanged a look that made Dax's ears burn. Their next volley of snowballs twisted in the air, forming unmistakable heart shapes before he could blast them apart. He was grateful for his partial shift, maybe the fur would hide his blush. "Your aim's getting sloppy, Frostlings," he called up, trying to cover his embarrassment. "Or are you trying to start a different kind of spark?" The Frostling twins dissolved into a shower of crystalline snowflakes, their bell-like laughter echoing across Silver Bell Square. Where they'd stood, delicate frost patterns bloomed on the cobblestones, perfect hearts that sparkled with mischievous energy. "Show-offs," Lumi muttered, brushing ice from her sleeve. Her fire magic still simmered beneath her skin, ready to defend against another attack. Dax's antlers shimmered and retracted as he shifted fully back to human form, though a dusting of silver frost clung stubbornly to his sandy hair. Says the woman who just turned snowballs into tiny fireballs. They started it. Lumi's mood-changing apron faded from fierce crimson to a thoughtful blue. She knelt to examine one of the heart patterns, running her fingers over the intricate design. "Look at this. Classic pranking magic, but amplified somehow." "Here." Dax scooped up what looked like frozen starlight, magic crystallized mid-prank. "They've been collecting power from the malfunctioning charm. Probably explains why they're so extra today." They gathered more evidence in silence, their earlier antagonism replaced by something quieter, more contemplative. Lumi couldn't help noticing how their magical signatures had stopped fighting each other. Where her flames met his winter energy now, they created something new, like the first warm breeze of spring touching the last snow of winter. A shiver ran through her, as residual ice magic nipped at her skin. Without comment, Dax gestured subtly, and suddenly she found herself wrapped in a pocket of perfect winter air, the kind that made snowflakes dance instead of sting. "Thanks," she said softly, surprised by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. They walked through Silver Bell Square, surveying the aftermath of their magical skirmish. The holiday decorations had taken on a life of their own. A group of wreaths hummed a surprisingly decent barbershop quartet version of Deck the Halls, while enchanted mistletoe performed elaborate aerial maneuvers overhead like tiny romantic acrobats. "We might have overdone it a bit," Dax admitted, ducking as a particularly enthusiastic sprig of mistletoe attempted a backflip above them. The charm bracelet on his wrist pulsed steadily, stronger than before. As they walked, trails of winter lights sparkled in their wake, as if the very air recognized their combined magic. Lumi found herself walking closer to Dax than strictly necessary, telling herself it was just to study the charm's reaction. Sweet Inferno's warm glow beckoned as they approached, Blaze's familiar magic reaching out to welcome them home. The mixing of bakery warmth and lingering winter spells created an atmosphere that felt like sliding into a hot bath after playing in the snow, cozy and just right. Lumi's hands still sparked with protective magic as she retrieved her keys, making them glow like hot coals. "Stop that," she whispered to her fingers, which ignored her completely. The moment they stepped inside, the candy cane chandelier blazed brighter than usual, responding to their altered magical signature. The light caught the remaining frost in Dax's hair, making it sparkle like diamond dust. They stood in the entrance, neither moving to break the comfortable silence that had settled between them. The quiet felt fragile, important somehow. Lumi found herself studying Dax's profile, noticing for the first time how his eyes caught the light like warm honey. Chapter 7: A Match Made in Magic. Flicker broke the spell with an enthusiastic wave, practically bouncing on its hook by the door. "Oh good, you're back." The sugar cookies were getting lonely. "They were not," Blaze grumbled from his corner. "I've been keeping them perfectly content, at a toasty 350 degrees. Lumi hurried to her workstation, grateful for the distraction. She had a cake to finish, after all. The competition wasn't going to win itself, even if they had dealt with the troublemaking twins. But before she could reach for her piping bags, a telltale shimmer caught her eye. The enchanted mistletoe, which had been innocently hanging by the door moments ago, zipped across the room with alarming speed. It positioned itself directly above her head, its leaves quivering with what could only be described as anticipation. "Don't you dare," she muttered, reaching for the bowl of magical frost flower icing. The mistletoe merely twinkled in response. Her hands trembled slightly as she began piping delicate frost flowers onto the cake's surface. She could hear Dax moving around behind her, the soft clink of mixing bowls and whispered conversations with her kitchen implements, creating a domestic symphony that felt dangerously comfortable. "Those are beautiful," Dax's voice came from just over her shoulder, startling her into nearly squeezing too hard on the piping bag. The mistletoe's glow intensified, casting everything in a warm golden light. Her fire magic responded instinctively, causing the freshly piped frosting to shimmer like dying embers. "Thanks," she managed, trying to focus on the intricate pattern and not on how his winter magic seemed to dance with her flames instead of fighting them. "It's an old family recipe. Well, minus the chaos you added earlier. I like to think of it as creative improvisation." He grinned, and she caught herself staring at his reflection in one of her copper pots, noticing how his usual mischievous expression had softened into something that made her ash-like freckles darken. The way the light caught his sandy blonde hair made him look almost angelic, which was ironic given she was the one with supernatural heritage. She reached for another piping bag, only to find Dax's hand already there. Their fingers brushed, sending a spark of magic that had nothing to do with her demonic heritage racing up her arm. Her mood-changing apron cycled rapidly through pink, purple, and a particularly telling shade of rose gold, betraying emotions she'd rather keep hidden. The fabric rippled like aurora borealis caught in cloth, and she silently cursed its inability to keep a secret. Blaze's knowing chuckle echoed through the kitchen. The temperature's rising in here, and for once it's not my fault. His knobs gleamed with an almost smug orange glow, and she could have sworn his temperature dial wiggled suggestively. The mistletoe performed an excited series of loop-de-loops, showering them with tiny golden sparks every time Dax stepped closer to check her progress. It seemed to be showing off now, performing increasingly elaborate aerial maneuvers that left trails of shimming light in its wake. "I need to focus on these magical ratios," Lumi muttered more to herself than anyone else, trying to ignore how the scent of pine and winter mint seemed to wrap around her whenever Dax moved. But her concentration kept slipping as Dax's gentle winter magic swirled around her workstation, complementing her fire in ways that should have been impossible. Where their magics met, tiny sparkles of gold and silver danced in the air, creating patterns that looked suspiciously like hearts. The candy cane chandelier, apparently deciding to join the conspiracy, dimmed its lights to create an atmosphere that was decidedly more romantic than professional. Its red and white stripes swirled lazily, casting a soft, rosy glow over everything below. Lumi silently cursed every enchanted fixture in her bakery for their obvious matchmaking attempts. Even the sugar shaker was trying to sprinkle a heart pattern onto her workspace. "Here," Dax said softly, moving to stand behind her as she struggled with a particularly complex piping pattern. His chest was warm against her back, and she could feel his breath stirring the loose strands of hair that had escaped her messy bun. "Let me help." His hands covered hers, steadying them, as they created a perfect spiral of frost flowers. The contrast between his cool touch and her naturally warm skin sent pleasant shivers down her spine. The mistletoe practically exploded with golden light, bathing the entire kitchen in a warm glow that made everything look like it had been dipped in honey. "Oh my!" Flicker fanned himself dramatically with his non-mitt end, his ember patterns swirling with excitement. "Is it getting hot in here, or is it just the obvious tension?" "Both," Blaze supplied helpfully and started humming what sounded suspiciously like "Can't Help Falling in Love." His heating elements pulsed in time with the melody, creating an impromptu light show. "That's it." Lumi spun around, sending a burst of fire magic toward the mistletoe. The flames were more sparkle than heat, and they both knew it. It dodged, retreating to a corner where it swayed in time with Blaze's humming, clearly plotting its next move. The plant looked entirely too pleased with itself, its leaves quivering with barely contained glee. But when she turned back to her work, she couldn't quite suppress her smile. Especially when she caught Dax watching her with that soft expression that made her heart perform acrobatics worthy of their mischievous mistletoe. His golden-flecked brown eyes held a warmth that had nothing to do with her fire magic, and everything to do with the way he looked at her like she was something precious and rare. "You missed a spot," he pointed out, reaching around her to add a tiny frost flower to the corner of the cake. His winter magic curled around her fingers like a gentle caress, and this time she didn't pull away. Dax slouched against the counter of Sweet Inferno, watching Lumi work her magic on the reconstructed peppermint mocha cake. A familiar tickle in his coat pocket made him stiffen. Oh no. Tinsel and Twinkle, his reindeer familiar figurines, chose that exact moment to make their grand entrance. They pranced out of his pocket, leaving trails of silvery hoofprints across the pristine countertop. He made a frantic grab for them, but the enchanted figurines dodged his fingers with practiced ease. "Get back here," he whispered, glancing nervously at Lumi's back. She was focused on piping delicate frost patterns onto the cake's surface, her hair catching the afternoon light in ways that made his heart do uncomfortable backflips. Tinsel, ever the drama queen, positioned herself next to the cake stand. The tiny silver reindeer raised her head regally, using her miniature antlers to gesture between Dax and Lumi with all the subtlety of a sugar-rushed elf. She even added a theatrical swoon, falling against the cake stand with one hoof pressed to her forehead. "I swear if you two embarrass me," his whispered threat cut off as he felt the familiar tingle of his magic surging. To his horror, he felt his antlers beginning to manifest, the weight settling on his head as his emotions slipped out of control. He quickly ran his fingers through his hair, trying to hide the silver-tipped points now poking through. Twinkle, not to be outdone by his companion, created a shimmering illusion in the air between them. Miniature versions of Dax and Lumi twirled under a sprig of mistletoe, while tiny magical fireworks exploded overhead. The illusion Dax dipped illusion Lumi dramatically and real. Dax contemplated whether it was possible to die of mortification. His eyes betrayed him, drawn inevitably to Lumi as she worked. The way she bit her lower lip in concentration, the subtle glow that lit her freckles when she used her fire magic to warm the frosting to the perfect temperature. Tinsel caught his moonstruck expression and took immediate advantage. She pranced around his hand, leaving a trail of sparkles that spelled out "smitten" in flowing script. Dax swiped at the words, but they just reformed into little hearts. "Would you two knock it off?" he hissed, but the figurines were on a mission. They coordinated with the actual mistletoe hanging above, creating a path of twinkling lights that kept trying to guide him toward Lumi's workstation. Every time he stepped away, the path would reform, complete with helpful little arrows. His winter magic, usually chaotic but somehow perfectly aligned with his familiar's matchmaking today, responded to his flustered state. Tiny snowflakes materialized around him, each one perfectly heart-shaped. Twinkle caught one on her nose and pretended to sob with joy, dabbing at her eyes with a microscopic handkerchief she'd conjured. Lumi turned slightly, reaching for a piping bag, and the kitchen lights caught her hair just right. The red strands gleamed like living flame, sending warm copper reflections dancing across the walls. Dax forgot to breathe for a moment, and both figurines flopped onto their backs in silent hysterics at his expression. Before he could scold them, Tinsel bounded to the frosted window. With a touch of her nose, she began writing in the condensation, "Kiss her ALR." Dax lunged forward, nearly upending a bowl of magical sprinkles in his haste to wipe away the message. "I'm going to turn you both into tree ornaments," he threatened under his breath, but his voice lacked any real heat. The figurines just shared a knowing look. The charm bracelet on his wrist, a family heirloom meant to help control his chaotic magic, chose that moment to betray him completely. It began to hum in harmony with the traces of Lumi's fire magic in the air, sending ribbons of aurora-like light swirling through the kitchen. His familiars, delighted with this new development, immediately began arranging the lights into hearts and stars. Tinsel and Twinkle, apparently deciding subtle hints weren't working, cleared a space on the counter for their grand finale. Using magic to create tiny props and costumes, they began an elaborate performance piece. Tinsel wore a miniature version of his flannel shirt, while Twinkle donned a tiny apron like Lumi's. The play consisted mainly of Tinsel, as Dax following Twinkle as Lumi around with exaggerated lovesick expressions and tiny floating hearts. I don't look like that," Dax protested weakly, knowing full well he probably did. The sound of his voice made Lumi turn, catching his eye unexpectedly. The warm ember orange of her gaze met his, and Dax felt his magic surge with a rush of warmth that had nothing to do with chaos, and everything to do with the way her lips curved into a slight smile. The mistletoe above them began to glow more intensely, and for once, Dax found himself thinking his meddling familiars might be onto something. Maybe all these magical nudges weren't so off base after all. Tinsel and Twinkle high-hoofed each other behind the sugar jar, looking entirely too pleased with themselves. Chapter 8: The Charm Confrontation. Lumi had just started contemplating whether enchanted mistletoe could be baked into a pie, purely for scientific reasons of course, when frantic knocking shattered the cozy atmosphere of her bakery. The sound sent Dax's reindeer figurines diving for cover, disappearing into his pocket with tiny silver flashes. The mistletoe, caught in its latest matchmaking attempt, zipped back to its post above the door with suspicious innocence. Through the frosted window panes, a familiar gnomish figure paced back and forth, his movements sharp and jittery. Rory Tinklepine's enchanted scarf cycled through colors faster than Lumi's seasonal menu changes, crimson to cerulean to chartreuse in the span of seconds. "That can't be good," Lumi muttered, just as the charm bracelet on Dax's wrist pulsed with an unstable burst of magic. The sugar containers on her shelves began to rattle ominously, their contents swirling into tiny cyclones. A few grains escaped, drawing anxious patterns in the air. Heat tingled through Lumi's fingers, her fire magic responding instinctively to the mounting tension. The wooden rolling pin beneath her hands acquired fresh scorch marks in the shape of fingerprints as she watched Rory's increasingly frantic gestures through the window. He clutched something to his chest. Was that smoke curling from a scroll? Behind her, Blaze's usually cheerful flames dimmed to concerned embers. "Don't like the feel of this," her oven grumbled. "That's fire magic mixing with gnomish anxiety. Never ends well for my temperature settings." The candy cane chandelier, a whimsical creation that usually cast warm peppermint-striped light across the shop, shifted to an ominous purple glow. Lumi recognized the magical interference. It was the same residual phi energy they'd picked up during their encounter with the Frostling twins. "Dax?" She turned to find him already looking at her, his usual playful smirk replaced with concern. Above them, his figurines peeked out just long enough to create a glowing arrow pointing toward the door, their silver forms trembling slightly. Rory's scarf had started blinking in distinct patterns, magical Morse code that spelled out urgent over and over. The charm bracelet on Dax's wrist pulsed in sync with Rory's nervous tapping, creating an unsettling harmony that made Lumi's teeth ache. Her apron, usually sporting cheerful holiday patterns, shifted to a stark warning red. The color reminded her uncomfortably of the time she'd accidentally created self-aware gingerbread warriors. That hadn't ended well for anyone, especially the cookie jar. "We should probably..." Lumi gestured toward the door, meeting Dax's golden-flecked gaze. The worry in his eyes made her stomach twist. She'd grown oddly accustomed to his mischievous expressions. Concern looked wrong on him, like mint in a chocolate chip cookie. Even Flicker, her usually sassy oven mitt, stopped its perpetual waving to hang limply by her side. The entire bakery seemed to hold its breath as Lumi reached for the door handle, the metal warm beneath her fire-touched fingers. The moment she turned the knob, Rory practically fell into the shop. His glasses sat askew on his nose, his beard looked like it had been struck by lightning, and in his trembling hands he clutched a scroll that definitely shouldn't have been smoking that particular shade of blue. "The charm," he wheezed, his scarf now a sickly shade of green. "It's worse than we thought. The Frostlings, he thrust the smoking scroll toward them. "We have a very big problem." The scroll's smoke curled into tiny ice crystals that drifted toward the ceiling, where the mistletoe made a valiant attempt to dodge them. Lumi's fire magic flared again, melting the crystals before they could reach her precious cake ingredients. She wasn't about to let fire magic ruin another batch of her peppermint extract. "Rory," Dax stepped forward, his charm bracelet now humming at a frequency that made the display cases vibrate. "Take a breath. What did the twins do?" But before Rory could answer, the scroll in his hands gave an almighty pop. A shower of sparks erupted from its surface, and the paper began to fold itself into an origami snowflake that danced mockingly in the air between them. Oh dear," Rory moaned, his scarf now cycling through colors so quickly it resembled a disco ball. "That's not supposed to happen. That is definitely not supposed to happen." Lumi reached for the floating snowflake, her fire magic instinctively gathering at her fingertips. But Dax caught her wrist, his touch sending an entirely different kind of warmth up her arm. "Careful," he warned, nodding toward where the snowflake's edges had begun to glow with that same suspicious fire magic. "I've seen this before. The twins are trying to tell us something." "By destroying official paperwork?" Lumi arched an eyebrow. "Seems on brand for them." The origami snowflake spun faster, its edges becoming sharp enough to slice through the tension in the room. From his pocket, Tinsel and Twinkle created a small magical barrier, their silver light forming a protective dome around the three of them. Blaze's flames flickered in a pattern that Lumi recognized as his stress baking signal. "Whatever that thing is," he rumbled, "it's affecting the magical balance in here. My temperature gauge is reading negative numbers, and that's not even possible." The charm bracelet gave another pulse, and this time Dax winced. "The twins didn't just tamper with the bake-off charm," he said, watching the snowflake with growing concern. "They've linked it to something else. Something bigger." "The Winter Solstice Spell Network," Rory squeaked, finally finding his voice. They've somehow connected the charm to the entire town's holiday magic system. If the charm fails during the bake-off, he didn't need to finish. Lumi could feel it in the way her fire magic recoiled from the snowflake's icy aura. If the charm collapsed, it would take Snowmelt Hollow's winter magic with it. No more enchanted snowball fights, no more magical light displays, no more holiday spirit amplifying the town's natural enchantments. No more Wintertide Bake-Off. The origami snowflake gave one final spin before exploding into a shower of glittering ice crystals, leaving behind only the faint echo of mischievous fire laughter and the distinct impression that they were all in way over their heads. Dax slumped against the bakery counter after Rory scurried away, the weight of responsibility settling heavy on his shoulders. His antlers materialized unbidden, spreading frost across the polished surface where his hands rested. The silver tips drooped pathetically, matching his mood. "Well, that's just perfect," he muttered. "The one time my chaos actually matters, and it's because I'm literally breaking the town's holiday magic." Tinsel and Twinkle emerged from his pocket with unusual solemnity. The silver figurines pranced across the frosted counter, creating delicate patterns of twinkling lights that formed encouraging messages. "You've got this," sparkled briefly before dissolving into snowflakes. His chaotic magic, responding to his distress, sent erratic pulses through the charm bracelet. Nearby whisks began a melancholy waltz across the counter, while measuring spoons clinked a sad symphony. The temperature couldn't seem to decide if it wanted to freeze or thaw, leaving patches of frost that melted and refroze in abstract patterns. "Maybe it's better if I just..." Dax's fingers found the clasp of the charm bracelet, ready to admit defeat. The golden flecks in his brown eyes had dulled to a flat brass, reflecting his resignation. A warm hand caught his before he could remove the bracelet. Lumi's touch sent a jolt through him, his winter magic instinctively reaching for her fire magic like a moth to flame. Where their magic met, golden sparks danced with snowflakes in a mesmerizing spiral that reflected in her ember-orange eyes. "Guess you were right about the whole Dasher the Disaster thing," he attempted his usual joke, but the words came out hollow. "I'm living up to the family legacy of chaos, in the worst possible way." Lumi's hair sparked with sudden flames, her expression fierce. "Don't you dare." Tinsel and Twinkle, apparently sharing Lumi's sentiment, launched into an elaborate performance. The tiny figurines reenacted the snowball fight, with miniature Dax heroically shielding miniature Lumi from the onslaught. Their silver forms left trails of sparkles that formed a heart above the scene, though they quickly dispersed it when Dax glanced their way. Even Blaze joined in, his flames forming encouraging shapes that danced across his oven door. "She's right, you know," the oven chimed in. "Your chaos adds flavor." "Look," Lumi tugged him toward the wall of copper pots, their reflections warped but visible in the burnished metal. "Watch what happens when you stop fighting it." Dax's magic swirled around them, creating unpredictable but beautiful patterns in the air. Frost spiraled in impossible geometries, catching the light like prisms and casting rainbow reflections across the kitchen. "Your magic isn't a curse," Lumi insisted, her own flames rising to dance with his frost. "It's the reason you can solve problems no one else can. Watch this." She lifted her hand, sending a stream of fire toward his frost. Instead of canceling each other out, their magic merged into something entirely new, crystalline structures that glowed from within, casting warm light through their icy facades. His antlers began to glow softly, responding to the harmonious blend of their powers. The charm bracelet, which had been pulsing erratically, steadied as Lumi placed her hand over it. Their combined magic created a perfect balance, chaos and control working in tandem rather than opposition. "Remember when your disaster magic actually saved those gingerbread cookies from becoming sentient troublemakers?" Lumi's reflection smiled at him. "Or how about when your chaos helped us track down the Fi's magical signature? Even this," she gestured to their joined hands over the bracelet, "would never have happened if you hadn't crashed into my candy cane display." Dax felt his magic respond to her words, no longer fighting to escape but flowing naturally, creating beautiful impossibilities wherever it touched. "You really think we can fix this?" "I know we can." Because your chaos doesn't just break things, it creates opportunities for something better. The mistletoe chose that moment to zip overhead, glowing smugly. For once, Dax didn't mind its meddling presence. He was too busy watching Lumi's reflection in the copper pots, seeing himself through her eyes, not as a disaster but as someone whose unpredictability could be a gift rather than a curse. His magic hummed with new possibility, no longer a source of doubt but of potential. Tinsel and Twinkle, never ones to miss a moment, created a miniature fireworks display above their heads. The sparkles formed the words Team Chaos before transforming into a shower of heart-shaped snowflakes. "Stop helping," Dax muttered to his familiars, but he couldn't hide his smile. For the first time since learning about the charm's malfunction, his antlers stood proud instead of drooping, their silver tips catching the light like stars. Chapter 9: The Bake-Off begins. Lumi's hands trembled slightly as she made the final adjustments to her masterpiece. The three-tiered peppermint mocha cake stood proudly on her display table, each layer perfectly balanced with swirls of controlled fire magic dancing beneath the surface. Dax's winter charm enhancements caught the light, creating a mesmerizing shimmer that drew appreciative murmurs from passing spectators. "Not bad for someone who nearly burned down her kitchen last week," Blaze commented from his temporary setup beside her table. She'd insisted on bringing him, despite the organizing committee's protests. Technically, talking ovens weren't standard competition equipment. "Hush you," Lumi whispered, but her mood-changing apron flickered to a pleased golden hue. The moment of satisfaction shattered as Chef Alden Crust's distinctive cologne, hints of vanilla and superiority, wafted past. He prowled between the displays in his pristine white chef's coat, pausing to cast a dismissive glance at her creation. "How quaint," he drawled, his perpetual sneer deepening. Though perhaps a bit provincial for such an esteemed competition. Lumi's apron shifted rapidly between confident gold and anxious purple, as she spotted him making his way toward the Frostling twins. The troublesome pair hovered near his elaborate ice sculpture centerpiece, their matching grins spelling trouble. "I don't like the look of that," Flicker muttered, sliding protectively closer to her hand. She didn't either, especially when Chef Alden's hushed conversation with the twins ended with synchronized giggles that sounded like breaking icicles. Her suspicions proved correct moments later when Alden accidentally stumbled against her display table. "Oh dear, how clumsy of me," he simpered, but Lumi caught the telltale glint of frost magic seeping from his fingers toward her cake's protective enchantments. Her ember-orange eyes widened in alarm as the delicate magical barriers flickered. The careful balance of fire and frost magic began to unravel, making her precious creation wobble precariously. Chef Alden stepped back, satisfaction oozing from his perfectly composed smile. "Need a hand, partner?" Dax's warm voice sent a wave of relief through her chest as he slid smoothly into place beside her display. His chaotic magic, usually so unpredictable, instinctively reached out to harmonize with her protective spells. The effect was immediate and unexpected. Her cake lifted gently into the air, surrounded by an ethereal dance of fire and snowflakes. The crowd gasped and applauded, phones appearing to capture the stunning display. Chef Alden's expression curdled like week-old cream as his sabotage frost magic rebounded off their combined protection. The backfire hit his pristine ice sculpture dead center, transforming the rigid classical design into a chorus line of cheeky snowmen. They kicked their frozen legs in perfect rhythm, clearly mocking his stuffy presentation. "I don't believe this was part of your original design, Alden," Lumi couldn't resist commenting as one snowman performed a particularly sassy pirouette. Blaze seized the moment to amplify the warm golden glow around her cake, while Flicker, never one to miss a dramatic opportunity, performed enthusiastic jazz hands directly in Chef Alden's increasingly red face. "This is outrageous," he spluttered, trying to regain control of his melting display. "This sort of magical interference is completely against regulation." "Actually," Dax interrupted smoothly as his reindeer figurine familiars emerged from his pocket, "the rules specifically encourage innovative magical fusion." The tiny crystal creatures pranced through the air, trailing miniature auroras that complemented the cake's design perfectly. "It's all about embracing the unexpected." He threw Lumi a quick wink that made her heart perform its own pirouette. The judges had gathered around their display, scribbling furiously on their notepads as Dax launched into an impromptu explanation about the beauty of combining chaos and precision. You see, he gestured to where fire and frost magic twirled in perfect harmony. Sometimes the most magical creations come from embracing our differences. A little chaos, a touch of precision, and suddenly you've got something extraordinary. Chef Alden's perfectly styled hair began to frizz as more of his ice sculpture succumbed to the magical backfire. The snowmen had started a conga line, led by the Frostling twins, who seemed to have forgotten whose side they were on in their excitement. This is absolutely ridiculous, he hissed, straightening his chef's coat with jerky movements. I refuse to stand here and watch this mockery of proper magical baking standards. As he stormed off toward the exit, the enchanted mistletoe that had somehow followed them from Sweet Inferno did delighted victory loops above Lumi and Dax's heads. One of the judges cleared her throat, adjusting her glasses to peer at their floating masterpiece. I must say this is quite remarkable, she announced, making another note. The innovative magical fusion alone deserves bonus points. Tell me, Ms. Vale, was this collaborative enhancement planned? Lumi glanced at Dax, who was trying to coax one of his familiars away from doing loop-de-loops through her cake's top tier. His chaotic magic still hummed in perfect rhythm with her own, as if it had always belonged there. Sometimes, she said softly, her apron settling into a warm, steady gold, the best recipes come together when you least expect them. Dax's antlers tingled with warning, just as the last judge finished sampling Lumi's spectacular peppermint creation. The charm bracelet around his wrist pulsed with an unsettling rhythm, sending ripples through the nearby magical displays. The enchanted ice sculptures began to flicker like cheap holiday lights, their usual crystalline glow stuttering in and out of existence. Not now, he muttered, tugging his sleeve over the bracelet. Just hold it together for 5 more minutes. But Tinsel and Twinkle had already abandoned their celebratory prancing atop the judges' table. The silver figurines galloped through the air toward him, their tiny hooves leaving trails of alarmed sparkles that spelled out, "Look up." Dax's stomach dropped as he followed their frantic gestures. Hairline fractures of wild magic were spreading across the competition hall's enchanted ceiling, like cracks in thin ice, leaking tendrils of unstable power. Without thinking, he let his transformation flow partially forward. The familiar warmth of his shifter magic rippled through him as his antlers emerged, already glowing with concentrated power as he tried to channel the charm's erratic energy through his natural winter abilities. Is everything all right? Someone in the crowd whispered. The murmurs grew as his antlers brightened, throwing shadows that danced eerily across the walls. Dax gritted his teeth, feeling the charm's ancient magic battle against his own chaotic power. The collision created waves of clashing frequencies that painted themselves across the air in sheets of aurora-like light. Oh dear, oh dear. Rory Tinklepine's voice cracked as he twisted his enchanted scarf into knots. The gnome's anxiety only heightened as holiday decorations began to malfunction around them. The traditional wreaths burst into a cacophony of off-key carols, while the enchanted snow reversed direction, floating upward in defiance of gravity. Well, well. Chef Alden's smooth voice cut through the growing chaos. It seems our esteemed event planner can't even maintain basic magical stability. How disappointing. He gestured dramatically at the deteriorating atmosphere. Is this what we should expect from someone whose family is known for nothing but causing trouble? Dax's concentration wavered, his careful channeling disrupted by the chef's words. The charm responded with a violent pulse that sent several nearby gingerbread displays toppling. Tinsel and Twinkle sprang into action, zipping through the air to create protective circles of silvery light around the most volatile areas. But their worried glances told Dax what he already knew. This was beyond their ability to contain. He forced his typically chaotic magic into rigid patterns, trying to match the charm's original structure. His eyes burned with the effort, the golden flecks in his irises blazing as he imposed order on his naturally wild power. For one brilliant moment, everything aligned. The charm's energy smoothed out, the decorations stabilized, and Dax felt a surge of hope. Then the bracelet rejected his control with explosive force. A shockwave of holiday magic burst outward, knocking over displays and sending a shower of ornaments raining down. Small rifts began tearing open in the magical atmosphere, leaking pure winter magic that crystallized everything it touched. A judge's cup of hot chocolate froze solid mid-sip, while a nearby table of cookies transformed into perfect, inedible replicas carved from ice. Dax's antlers crackled ominously as 3 distinct magical signatures warred for control: his innate chaos, the charm's ancient power, and threading through it all, an unmistakable trace of malicious fey tampering that felt like frost burning across his skin. The charm began to emit a sound like sleigh bells being dragged through broken glass, a magical distortion that set everyone's teeth on edge. Dax's knees threatened to buckle as he poured more power into maintaining even basic stability, but the conflicting energies were tearing him apart. "Dax?" Lumi's voice cut through his concentration. She stood beside her cake display, hands wreathed in protective flames, as she deflected a shower of magically animated icicles. "Whatever you're doing, it's not working." "I noticed," he called back, ducking as a strand of enchanted tinsel whipped past his head like a silver serpent. "But if I let go completely?" "Then let go completely." She gestured at the chaos around them. "Your magic is chaos incarnate. Stop fighting it." "The charm needs structure," he argued, even as another wave of magical feedback made him stagger backward into a display table. His antlers tingled with conflicting energies, winter magic fighting against the pure chaos that ran through his bloodline. "If I don't control it?" "Since when has controlling chaos ever worked?" Lumi deflected another ice shard, with a graceful twist of her flame-wreathed hands. The determination in her ember-bright eyes made his heart skip. "You're a Blitzen. Maybe it's time to embrace that." The charm's tone reached a fever pitch, vibrating through his bones like discordant sleigh bells. Dax felt his carefully maintained control beginning to slip, years of practiced restraint crumbling like gingerbread walls. Tinsel and Twinkle abandoned their protective circles to hover anxiously near his antlers, their tiny silver forms glowing with determination as they prepared to channel whatever he decided. He could feel their unwavering trust, even as his own confidence wavered. Around him, the competition hall descended further into magical mayhem. Chef Alden's prize soufflé exploded in a shower of enchanted sugar crystals, coating his pristine white coat in sparkling debris. Rory had wrapped himself entirely in his scarf like a panicked magical burrito, his muffled whimpers barely audible over the chaos. And through it all, those fractures in the ceiling continued to spread like crystalline spiderwebs, threatening to shatter the entire magical atmosphere of the event. Dax could feel each crack like a personal failure, another mark against his family's reputation. Chapter 10: Chaos in the Kitchen. A piercing whine cut through the competition hall as the charm on Dax's wrist flared with unstable energy. Lumi's attention snapped from their half-finished dessert to the sound, which had somehow synchronized with Blaze's nervous humming into an eerie duet. "That can't be good," Lumi muttered, just as every enchanted oven in the hall surged with magical power. The temperature gauge on her station swung wildly between extremes. "Little help here." Blaze's knob spun frantically. "This magical feedback is making me dizzy." Without thinking, Lumi rushed to Dax's side. His face had gone pale, magical energy crackling around him like static electricity. Her fire magic reached out instinctively, creating a steady warmth that seemed to calm the worst of the charm's fluctuations. "Thanks," Dax managed through gritted teeth. "Though I think we might have bigger problems." He wasn't wrong. Around them, ovens began shooting alternating bursts of flames and frost. Half-finished cakes collapsed, delicate sugarwork melted, and carefully crafted chocolate sculptures warped beyond recognition. "Sabotage." Chef Alden's voice rose above the chaos. "This is clearly an attempt to ruin my masterpiece." His pristine white coat was now splattered with patches of soot and frost. Lumi watched the erratic bursts of magic, noting how they pulsed in an almost rhythmic pattern. It reminded her of the way Dax's magic had behaved during their practice sessions, chaotic but with an underlying structure, like jazz improvisation. Dax? She grabbed his wrist where the charm pulsed. Stop trying to force it stable. Your magic works in patterns, look at the ovens. They're matching your rhythm. You want me to lean into the chaos? His eyes widened. That seems. Trust me. Lumi guided his arm in a gentle wave, letting her own magic flow alongside his. The charm's energy began to shift, still wild but more controlled, like a dance rather than a storm. A shield of harmonized magic spread around their workstation, fire and frost swirling together in mesmerizing patterns. Lumi turned back to their half-finished dessert, pulling Dax with her. We can still do this. Other competitors abandoned their stations as their ovens went completely haywire. But Blaze held steady, his temperature perfect despite the magical interference. That's it, Sugar Snap. Blaze called out. Drop it 3 degrees on the left side. And Dax, your winter magic is perfect for the crystallization we need. Dax's enchanted reindeer figurines darted between stations, their tiny antlers glowing as they marked safe paths through the magical chaos. Lumi and Dax fell into a rhythm, moving around each other like they'd been baking together for years instead of days. Duck. Dax pulled her down as a particularly violent surge caused Blaze to hiccup, a massive fireball. Instead of dodging, Lumi reached out, catching the flames in her hands. With a twist of her wrists, she shaped them into delicate spirals that danced above their workspace. Now that's what I call improvising. Their chocolate soufflé rose perfectly, defying the magical havoc around them. Where Lumi's fire magic touched it, the surface caramelized into golden swirls. Where Dax's winter magic brushed against it, delicate frost patterns bloomed. The two effects should have canceled each other out. Instead, they created something entirely new. The judges watched transfixed, as Dax's magic lifted the dessert into the air. Lumi directed her controlled flames to weave around it in an intricate dance, highlighting the play of frost and fire across its surface. This is impossible. Chef Alden stormed toward their station, brandishing his piping bag like a weapon. You're making a mockery of proper baking technique. He squeezed the bag, sending a jet of bitter chocolate sauce toward their floating creation. But as it passed through their harmonized magical barrier, the sauce transformed, breaking into thousands of tiny golden sparkles that settled onto the soufflé like edible glitter. The crowd's gasps turned to applause. Lumi felt Dax's charm steady against her palm where she still held his wrist, its erratic pulses finally finding a rhythm that matched their combined magic. Would you look at that? Dax murmured, watching their creation spin gently in the air. Chaos and control. More like disaster and determination, Lumi corrected, but she couldn't help smiling. Their dessert wasn't just a dish. It was proof that sometimes the most unexpected combinations created the most extraordinary results. The charm hummed contentedly, its magic now flowing in smooth waves that matched the pattern of frost and flame still dancing across their soufflé's surface. Around them, the other ovens gradually settled, though the competition hall still bore evidence of their earlier rebellion, scorch marks on the ceiling, patches of frost on the floor, and one very disgruntled Chef Alden covered in golden sparkles. Dax's heart thundered in his chest, as the last echoes of applause faded from the competition hall. He couldn't take his eyes off the swirling ribbons of magic dancing above their winning creation, his winter frost weaving perfectly with Lumi's flames in a mesmerizing display he'd never seen before. Their combined power had not only saved the competition, but transformed his usually chaotic magic into something beautiful. The charm bracelet on his wrist hummed with a warm, steady pulse that matched the rhythm of their merged magic. For the first time since he'd inherited the family curse, the chaos wasn't fighting him. Instead, it flowed naturally, creating delicate swirls of golden light that encompassed them both. Would you look at that? He murmured, watching as the last of the crowd filtered out, leaving them in a peaceful bubble of magical aftermath. Behind Lumi, Tinsel and Twinkle had taken up strategic positions on a nearby display shelf, their silver forms gleaming as they began conducting an intricate light show with their crystalline antlers. A familiar tingling at his temples made him reach up self-consciously. His antlers were manifesting, creating a crown of frost that caught the light. When he glanced at Lumi, Her ember-orange eyes reflected the crystalline patterns, making them dance like flames trapped in amber. Something sparkled overhead, and Dax caught a glimpse of that troublemaking mistletoe descending from wherever it had been hiding. Its magical trail of silver sparkles merged with the remnants of their combined power, creating new patterns that swirled around them like falling stars. Tinsel and Twinkle, never ones to miss an opportunity, synchronized their movements with the mistletoe's descent. The winter lights they conjured echoed the way his and Lumi's magic had twined together during their frantic battle to save the competition's desserts. Dax took a step closer to Lumi, drawn by something stronger than the mistletoe's pull. His magic, usually as unruly as a winter storm, settled into a steady rhythm that pulsed between them in waves of soft golden light. He could actually feel it matching her heartbeat. "You know," he said softly, watching the charm bracelet glow with unprecedented stability, "I've spent my whole life thinking this chaos was just, well, chaos. But with you..." He gestured to the harmonious display of their combined magic above them. "You make it make sense." The ash-like freckles across Lumi's cheeks began to shimmer with an inner light, and Dax's breath caught in his throat. "No one's ever understood it before, understood me. But your fire doesn't fight my frost. It complements it. Makes it better." He reached out, barely breathing as he brushed a strand of fire-bright hair from her face. His winter magic responded instinctively, creating tiny perfect snowflakes that danced through her flames without melting. They hung suspended between them, each one catching and reflecting the light of her magic. The mistletoe's power built around them, its ancient magic recognizing something Dax had felt growing since that first chaotic meeting in her bakery. Their magical signatures surged together, and suddenly the air was filled with cascading golden light and crystalline frost flowers that bloomed and sparkled in the space around them. Dax barely registered Tinsel and Twinkle's silent celebration as he leaned in, drawn by the way Lumi's eyes flickered like embers in the magical light. When their lips finally met, it felt like every bit of chaos in his soul finally found its purpose. Their magic exploded in perfect harmony, fire and frost, chaos and control combining in a display that lit up the entire hall. The charm bracelet blazed with newfound strength, and all around them, every magical mishap in the room suddenly righted itself. Floating mixing bowls settled gently onto counters. Runaway enchanted whisks found their way home. Even the temperamental ovens hummed in perfect tune. But Dax barely noticed any of it, too caught up in the way Lumi's magic danced with his own, creating patterns more beautiful than any winter sky he'd ever seen. For the first time in his life, his chaos wasn't something to be contained or controlled. It was one half of something wonderful, something that only worked because of who they were together. As he drew back slightly, he could see their combined magic reflected in Lumi's eyes, and the smile that curved her lips told him she felt it too. Tinsel and Twinkle had abandoned all pretense of subtlety, their magical light show now featuring miniature fireworks and prancing reindeer made of starlight. The mistletoe bobbed triumphantly overhead, its glow adding to the spectacular display of their merged magic that continued to paint the air with swirling patterns of gold and silver. "I think," Dax said, watching a perfect spiral of frost and flame twine above them, "this is what they mean by making magic." The terrible pun earned him an eye roll from Lumi, but she was still smiling, and her magic was still dancing with his in ways that defied everything he'd ever known about his family's curse. Chapter 11: The Fae's Last Trick. Lumi's heart still tingled from that magical kiss when a blast of Arctic air cut through the competition hall. Her mood-changing apron flashed from romantic pink to alarming crimson as the Frostling twins materialized in a whirl of vindictive snowflakes, their usual playful grins now sharp with malice. "Sorry to frost your moment," Icy drawled, her icy blue skin practically glowing with mischief. "But we've got some unfinished business." Crystal's giggle echoed like breaking icicles as she twirled her finger, conjuring a localized blizzard that sent judges and spectators scrambling. Through the chaos, Lumi caught a glimpse of Icy sidling toward the judges' table, where the charm bracelet lay next to the golden whisk trophy. Without thinking, Lumi reached for Dax's magic, the connection between them still electric from their kiss. His winter chaos met her flames halfway, and suddenly they were moving in perfect sync, creating a shield of steam and sparkles that deflected the twins' frost magic like it was nothing more than a gentle snowfall. Show-offs, Crystal pouted, disappearing into her own magical storm. The twins split up, forcing Lumi and Dax to separate. "I'll take Crystal," Lumi called out, then caught movement from the corner of her eye. And apparently Chef Alden too. The smug baker was trying to use the confusion to sneak away with the trophy, his pristine white coat making him stand out against the swirling snow. Lumi channeled her fire through the lingering traces of Dax's magic, creating controlled bursts of steam that cut through Crystal's illusions. Each blast revealed glimpses of blue skin and glittering hair, tracking the Phi's movement through her own storm. "A little help here." Blaze's voice rang out from the kitchen area. Lumi turned to see her enchanted oven coordinating with the other magical appliances, creating a protective ring of warmth around the huddled judges and spectators. "Nobody messes with my humans." A sharp crack of ice drew Lumi's attention back to the competition tables. Crystal hovered over Lumi's winning dessert, frost gathering at her fingertips. But before she could strike, Dax's reindeer figurines leaped from his pocket, their tiny hooves clicking against the frosted floor as they raised the alarm. Lumi spun, reaching again for that spark of connection with Dax. Their magic collided midair, transforming Crystal's attack into an elaborate ice sculpture that captured the essence of their earlier victory, complete with tiny, perfect details of their magical kiss. Crystal gaped at the sculpture. "Okay, that's actually pretty cute." Lumi's ember-orange eyes met Dax's across the chaos, finding his warm brown gaze already fixed on her. The golden flecks in his irises seemed to dance as they moved together, their steps perfectly matched, as if they'd been practicing this dance for years instead of stumbling into it moments ago. The charm bracelet pulsed with renewed energy as they cornered the twins, their combined magic creating a spectacular display. Fire-touched snowflakes swirled around frost-edged flames, painting the hall in a breathtaking array of warm and cool light. "Enough games," Icy snarled, gathering her power for one final assault. But when she released it, their unified magic transformed her frost into a shower of heart-shaped snowflakes that drifted lazily through the air. Crystal burst into bell-like laughter. "Oh sister, your magic's gone soft." "Shut up," Icy grumbled, her glowing snowflake tattoos dimming as she lowered her hands in defeat. "This isn't nearly as fun as I thought it would be." As the magical storm dissipated, Lumi surveyed the aftermath. Her winning dessert stood pristine on its pedestal, somehow even more beautiful than before. And there, beside the judges' table, stood Chef Alden, or rather, there he was frozen in place, one hand still reaching for the trophy while the other was completely covered in what appeared to be magically animated whipped cream. "Is that your doing?" Lumi asked Dax, trying not to laugh at Alden's expression of pure indignation. "Actually," one of Dax's figurines piped up, "that was us. Nobody steals from our human's girlfriend." "I'm not his," Lumi started to protest, but the words died in her throat as Dax's hand found hers, their magic still humming contentedly where they touched. "The figurines have spoken," Dax teased, squeezing her hand. "And they're usually right about these things." Before Lumi could respond, Blaze called out from his protective circle. "If you two are done making heart eyes at each other, we still have some troublemaking twins to deal with." Dax's heart thundered in his chest as Crystal helped Icy to her feet, their defeat evident in the light dusting of magical residue that covered their crystalline forms. But something about Crystal's expression, that knowing smirk as she pointed at the charm bracelet pulsing with brilliant light, made his antlers tingle with anticipation. "Well, well," Crystal sang, her voice like wind chimes in a winter breeze. "Looks like chaos finally found its anchor." The words triggered an immediate response in Dax's magic. His antlers materialized fully, sending cascades of silver-white energy rippling across the competition hall's ceiling. The familiar weight should have felt overwhelming, but instead it felt right. "What are you talking about?" he asked, though something in his chest already knew the answer. The Frostling twins exchanged identical grins, their snowflake tattoos twinkling like stars. "Did you really think we'd waste our time sabotaging a silly baking competition?" Icy asked, brushing frost from her sleeve. "Though watching you covered in sentient whipped cream was quite entertaining," Crystal added with a bell-like giggle. We were testing you, they said in perfect unison, their voices creating harmonies that echoed through the hall. Both of you. As if on cue, Tinsel and Twinkle zipped from Dax's pocket, their silver forms glowing with purpose. They danced through the air, casting shimmering illusions that played out like magical memories, Dax and Lumi taming the rebellious gingerbread, their magic weaving together seamlessly during the snowball fight, the moment they'd saved the competition's desserts with that perfectly balanced combination of fire and frost. But the charm, Dax started, then stopped as he noticed something extraordinary. The bracelet's glow perfectly matched the warm orange tones of Lumi's fire magic. It pulsed in a steady rhythm that felt remarkably familiar, like a heartbeat he'd known all his life. The charm never malfunctioned, Icy said, already beginning to dissolve into swirling snowflakes. It was waiting, Crystal finished, her form shimmering. For the right connection. They disappeared in a shower of crystalline flakes, their laughter lingering like echo of sleigh bells. Sometimes chaos needs a spark to find its perfect balance. Dax turned to Lumi, who stood watching the magical display with wide ember-orange eyes. As she stepped closer, he felt his typically unruly magic respond with unexpected grace. The usual static-like crackle of his power smoothed into something fluid and controlled, meeting her warmth like winter sunshine on fresh snow. By my enchanted scarf. Rory Tinklepine burst forward, his accessory signing frantically in magical symbols. The twins are right. The charm, it was designed to recognize and strengthen true magical partnerships. That's why it kept acting up around you two. It was trying to push you together. Tinsel and Twinkle took this as their cue to launch into an elaborate performance, recreating tiny versions of every disaster that had thrown Dax and Lumi together. The candy cane cascade, the enchanted batter chase, even their market mishap with the stuck-together shopping bags. A familiar whoosh announced the arrival of that persistent enchanted mistletoe, but this time, Dax noticed something different. Its magic didn't feel intrusive or mischievous anymore. Instead, it resonated with the charm's glow in a way that felt like puzzle pieces clicking into place. His eyes met Lumi's, and he saw the same realization dawning in their fiery depths. Every magical mishap, every chaotic moment that had brought them together, it hadn't been random at all. Their powers had been reaching for each other from the very start. So, Lumi said, a smile playing at her lips, your chaos was just looking for my spark? The charm pulsed warmly as Dax pulled her closer. And your fire needed my frost to shine brighter. Their magic merged instantly, creating an aurora of orange and silver that danced across the competition hall's ceiling. The display was so spectacular that even Chef Alden, still picking magical whipped cream from his pristine chef's coat, offered a grudging nod of approval. Tinsel and Twinkle pranced triumphantly through the air, trailing sparkles that formed hearts and snowflakes. The charm's glow steadied into a constant warm light that matched the rhythm of their synchronized heartbeats. I guess sometimes, Dax murmured, watching their combined magic paint the air with impossible colors, chaos knows exactly where it belongs. The mistletoe bobbed in agreement above them, its leaves somehow managing to look smug. Chapter 12, A Bite of Holiday Magic. Lumi's heart fluttered with an unfamiliar warmth as she slipped away from the bustling celebration, the golden whisk trophy cradled in her arms. Behind her, Dax's footsteps crunched in the fresh snow, creating a mesmerizing pattern, her steps leaving tiny flame marks while his trailed frost flowers in their wake. I still can't believe we pulled it off, she murmured, watching the trophy catch the light of the floating lanterns in Silver Bell Square. The golden surface seemed to pulse in harmony with their combined magical aura, creating ripples of amber and silver that danced across the snow. Enchanted snowflakes pirouetted around them as they made their way to the fountain's edge. Even the usually troublesome mistletoe appeared to be on its best behavior, drifting serenely above their heads instead of zipping around like a sugar-rushed fairy. Her apron, typically a riot of fierce reds and oranges, shifted through gentle pastels, betraying her softening mood. Tinsel and Twinkle, ever the show-offs, pranced through the air, transforming ordinary snowflakes into miniature constellations. The effect created a private cosmos around them, intimate and magical in a way that made her throat tight with emotion. Your freckles, Dax said softly, reaching out to trace the ash-like marks on her cheek. His finger left delicate frost patterns in its wake, but for once the cold didn't make her flinch. Instead, the icy touch complemented her eternal flame, like stars winking in a sunset sky. The massive Christmas tree that dominated the square, notorious for its running commentary on passers-by, remained blessedly silent. Only its lights twinkled in apparent approval as their magic mingled in the space between them, creating swirls of steam and sparkles. "I've never seen your eyes quite like this," Dax whispered. Lumi caught their reflection in the fountain's surface. Her ember-orange irises reflected the aurora their combined powers had created overhead. Her hair, usually a defensive inferno, flickered with gentle warmth, more like a cozy hearth than a wildfire. From Sweet Inferno, Blaze's distant humming carried on the winter breeze, a surprisingly melodic backdrop to the moment. The sound reminded her of all the times she'd fought to control her fire magic, to make it smaller, safer, more contained. "It's different with you," she admitted, watching their magical signature paint the fountain's enchanted water in sweeping arcs of steam and ice crystals. "My fire has never felt so balanced. Like it finally makes sense." The words caught in her throat, but she forced them out anyway. "Like your chaos was the missing ingredient all along." Tinsel and Twinkle, apparently overcome by the romance of it all, nestled into the folds of her apron. Their tiny hooves left trails of heart-shaped sparkles that matched the golden flecks, dancing in Dax's warm brown eyes. When he reached for her hand, she didn't hesitate. Their fingers intertwined, and their magic flowed together as naturally as butter melting into warm dough. There was no struggle for control, no clash of opposing forces, just a perfect blend creating something entirely new and wonderful. The mistletoe above them began to glow, but not with its usual mischievous energy. Instead, it cast a steady, warm light that wrapped around them like a blanket. As Dax leaned in, Lumi lifted her face to his, their combined magic transforming the square into a wonderland where fire and frost danced in perfect harmony. His lips met hers, and for once, Lumi didn't worry about burning too hot or losing control. Their magic sparked and swirled, creating a display that would have put the northern lights to shame, but she barely noticed. All she could focus on was the way Dax's gentle chaos complemented her fierce fire, like they'd been two halves of the same spell all along. The golden whisk trophy glowed brighter between them, its magic recognizing and amplifying their connection. Snowflakes caught fire and turned to stardust around them, while frost patterns bloomed with tiny flames at their centers. The fountain's water played a symphony of steam and ice, creating crystalline sculptures that caught and reflected their combined light. Flicker, who had somehow followed them from the bakery, gave an approving snap from Lumi's pocket. The enchanted oven mitt's usual snark was replaced by a gentle warmth that matched the moment perfectly. The Christmas tree's lights pulsed in a slow, romantic pattern, and even the usually chaotic swirls of magic in Silverbell Square seemed to settle into a peaceful dance around them. In that moment, surrounded by the perfect blend of winter and warmth, chaos and control, Lumi finally understood why her recipes had always felt like they were missing something. Sometimes the most perfect creations came from the most unexpected combinations, like a half-demon pastry chef and a chaos-cursed reindeer shifter finding their own kind of magic in each other's arms. Dax's heart raced as he sat beside Lumi on the fountain's edge, their fingers intertwined. The evening air sparkled with residual magic from their victory, but he barely noticed, too focused on the way her ember-orange eyes reflected the twinkling lights strung across the square. "You know," he said, trying to keep his voice casual despite the nervous flutter in his chest, "I've been thinking about how this all started." A knowing smirk played at the corner of her mouth. "You mean when you destroyed my bakery?" "Created an opportunity for improvement," he corrected, earning an eye roll that somehow managed to be both exasperated and fond. With his free hand, he made a subtle gesture toward the nearest enchanted snowman. The rotund figure perked up, adjusted its carrot nose, and waddled over with exaggerated stealth, clutching a concealed cake box behind its back. Above them, Tinsel and Twinkle paused their victory celebration light show, their silver forms practically vibrating with anticipation. Dax caught their excited exchange of glances. They'd been practicing this moment for days. Without releasing Lumi's hand, He wasn't ready to break that connection just yet. Dax lifted his other palm. His winter magic responded instantly, wrapping around the cake box in tendrils of sparkling frost. The box floated between them, snowflakes dancing around its edges like eager performers waiting for their cue. Dax? Lumi's voice held a note of curiosity he'd grown to love over the past few days. He kept his golden-flecked eyes fixed on her face as the box slowly opened, savoring the moment her expression shifted from confusion to wonder. There, floating in a gentle spiral of magic, was her original peppermint mocha cake. Every swirl, every crystallized snowflake, every flame-touched decoration restored to perfect harmony. Their magic, already humming between their joined hands, surged in response to her surprise. Delicate patterns of frost and flame began weaving through the air, mimicking the intricate designs on the cake's surface. The magical signature they'd created together, his chaos tempered by her precision, her fire balanced by his winter, had never felt more right. Blaze helped me perfect the restoration spell, Dax explained softly, watching the play of emotions across her face. He's surprisingly patient when he's not trying to set things on fire. We practiced for hours, learning how to weave both our magical essences into the enchantments. Turns out your cranky oven has a romantic streak. The cake rotated slowly between them, each turn revealing new details where their magic had merged. What had once been separate elements, his sparkling frost and her dancing flames, now coexisted in perfect balance, neither overpowering the other. His antlers began to glow with a gentle silver light, responding to the way Lumi's ash-like freckles brightened with delight. Their magical auras pulsed in perfect sync, creating patterns that looked remarkably like the snowflakes and flame motifs they'd perfected together. Tinsel and Twinkle couldn't resist adding their own touch, sending subtle sparkles cascading around the cake like falling stars. Their magical enhancement highlighted the intricate ways the restoration spell had captured both aspects of their power, the controlled chaos of his winter magic swirling seamlessly with her fiery precision. The fountain behind them responded to their combined magic, its enchanted water creating a backdrop of delicate steam and ice crystals that caught the light like prisms. You know, Dax continued, his voice soft but sure, fixing this cake made me realize something. We're not just good at cleaning up my messes together, though we've had plenty of practice there. He grinned as she snorted in agreement. We're meant to create magic together. The chaos and the control, the winter and the fire, it all works because it's us. The mistletoe above them brightened, its glow intensifying as if agreeing with his words. Their already close position shifted naturally, drawn together by the magnetic pull of their magic. Lumi's free hand came up to rest against his chest, right over his thundering heart. You restored my cake, she whispered, wonder and something deeper coloring her voice. I restored our cake, he corrected gently. Just like everything else, it's better when we do it together. When their lips met this time, it felt different, deeper, more certain, like coming home after a long journey. Their magic sealed the bond through the cake's enchantments, creating a perfect circle of perpetually falling snow and dancing flames around them. The fountain spray crystallized into delicate ice flowers, while warm golden light pulsed through the square like heartbeats. Tinsel and Twinkle's celebratory light show reached a crescendo, painting the night with silver and gold, but Dax barely noticed. He was too busy discovering that Lumi tasted like cinnamon and starlight, and that sometimes the best kind of chaos was the kind you chose to share. Thank you for listening. Please like, subscribe, and comment. I want to hear from you.